Welcome to the Fantasy Fanatics Podcast. I'm your host, James, and we're here once again to talk about some NFL football. We'll be talking about the recap of Super Wildcard Weekend this past weekend, and we'll also be previewing the upcoming divisional playoff round. We'll be looking at some NBA pickups, and we'll be taking a look at the NHL West Division, as well as taking a look at some players from the World Juniors and just the upcoming slates in both the NBA and the NHL, along with injuries in all the sports. We'll start with the NFL recap from this past weekend. I'm joined once again by Nate. Hey, Nate, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Your Browns got a big win this weekend. I can still see you're rocking that brown scarf. It looks good on you, man.
Thanks.
Yeah, let's just hop right into the recap. We'll start from the first game on Saturday. The Buffalo Bills narrowly beat the Indianapolis Colts by a score of 27 to 24. I know you picked the Bills heading into this game. I took the Colts. It was a very back and forth game. Any team could have come out on top of this one, but as we've seen, the Buffalo Bills did come out on top. Um, just looking at some of the totals for Buffalo, Josh Allen threw for 324 yards and two touchdowns. He also rushed for 54 yards and a score. Um, Stephon Diggs caught 128 yards on six catches and one touchdown. Gabriel Davis had four catches for 85 yards, and Cole Beasley added seven catches for 57 yards for the Bills. And on the Colts side, Phillip Rivers threw 309 yards and two passing touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor rushed 78 yards and one touchdown, with Nyheim Hines adding 75 yards on the ground. And in terms of receiving, Michael Pittman had five catches for 90 yards. Jack Doyle, seven catches, 70 yards, and a receiving touchdown, as well as Zach Pascal getting three catches for 37 yards and a touchdown. I just wanted to ask you, Nate, what are your thoughts on this game, especially with the Bills coming out on top?
I think it was a close call for sure. I when I saw that the Bills were only able to get a field goal, I was wondering like are the Colts gonna like make a comeback victory, but the Bills were able to hold on. So I think their defense looked pretty good. They were pretty clutch.
Yeah, I think Buffalo did show a lot of people that they can play defense. And then their offense, I know they didn't produce at the level they had been over the past few games, but they did what they needed to do to get everything done and to win this game. Yeah, and the Indianapolis Colts, I don't think that they should, fault themselves. They had a good game. I know one of their field goals hit off a goal post. They missed some fourth and goals. I mean, just some bounces that didn't go their way. They easily could have won this game. So I think the Colts have a lot to look forward to next year. Taking a look at the next game, it was the NFC game, NFC West game to be exact, with two teams from that division, the LA Rams at the Seattle Seahawks. The Rams do come out on top of this game, 30 to 20, and I know both of us picked the Seahawks, so that didn't look good on our slate. We both expected the Seahawks offense to dominate this game, and it did not. The Rams defense really dominated, and Jared Goff did play. I know he wasn't at 100% because of his injury, but the Rams were still able to get it done. Goff threw for 155 yards and a touchdown. Cam Akers rushed for 131 yards and a touchdown. And then in the receiving game, Cooper Kupp had four catches for 78 yards. Robert Woods, four catches for 48 yards and a touchdown. And Akers added two catches as well for 45 yards. And yeah, this team, they didn't really rely totally on offense. I know they had a defensive touchdown in there, and the Rams had an overall good game. Yeah, looking at the Seahawks, they weren't able to do too much on offense. Wilson only throwing for 174 yards. He did throw two touchdowns, but also an interception. Chris Carson rushed for 77 yards on the ground, with Wilson also rushing for 50 yards. And then DK Metcalf had 96 yards through the air and two scores, with Tyler Lockett just adding two catches for 43 yards. And Nate, I want to get to you about this game. What happened in this game? Why did the Rams upset the Seahawks here? And what do you like about the Rams going forward?
Well, the Rams showed us why they're the number one defense in the league currently, and I mean, like Russell Wilson's been doing this for a long time. There's not a lot of defenses out there that can just stop him like that.
And he's been doing it in the playoffs too.
Yeah, and like like I said before, like Metcalf is really hard to stop one on one, but they were still able to stop everyone else, and you can't just rely on one receiver.
Yeah, I think that even with the Aaron Donald injury partway through that game, they had a lot of playmakers on that defense to be able to hold the Seahawks. They put a lot of pressure on the quarterback, and they were just able to find ways just to, get sacks, get interceptions, and then just also closely defend all of the receivers. And yeah, Aaron Donald should be back next week. I'm excited to see what the Rams can do in the divisional round of the playoffs. Moving forward to the evening game on Saturday, it was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Washington football team. And I both of us did pick the Buccaneers, and the Buccaneers did come up on top 31-23. Um, some people said that this was going to be an easy game for the Bucks, but it didn't look that way. This game was actually closer uh, than people originally thought. It was only an 8 point game, 31-23, and um, Washington football team really played well. Quarterback Alex Smith didn't start, so they started backup Taylor Heineke, and he really went off in this game. 306 passing yards with a touchdown and an interception. He also rushed for 46 yards himself and a touchdown, with Antonio Gibson adding 31 yards on the ground. J.D. McKissick rushing in a touchdown on the ground as well. And then in receiving, Cam Sims had 104 receiving yards on 7 catches. Terry McLaurin, 75 yards on 6 catches. Logan Thomas, 74 yards on 5 catches. And then Steven Sims, 3 catches for 33 yards and the touchdown. And yeah, this Washington team, they have a lot to look forward to in the future. They have a lot of bright young stars, both on the offense and the defensive side. Although the defense wasn't able to do enough to stop Tampa Bay, Tom Brady throwing for 381 yards and 2 touchdowns. In the rushing game, Leonard Fournette had 93 yards on the ground and a touchdown. And then Mike Evans had 119 yards receiving on 6 receptions. Cameron Brate, 4 catches for 80 yards. Chris Godwin, 5 catches for 79 yards and a touchdown. And Antonio Brown added 2 catches for 49 yards and a touchdown. And Nate, I want to ask you. I know we thought Tampa Bay was going to walk through this game, um, even though it was closer than we expected. What did you think about Tampa Bay in this game?
Um, well, I mean, it's Tom Brady, right? And he's done good with worse, and he has like a bunch of really good wide receivers to throw to. I think he has Fournette, and Fournette's a good running back. The Washington football team, their defense is like fourth in the league, but I mean, there's only so much you can do that to stop an offense like that.
Yeah, like we didn't even mention Ronald Jones. He was a late scratch for this game. I believe he had some kind of injury. And as well, we didn't mention Rob Gronkowski, who had some looks in the end zone, but he wasn't factored in as much in the receiving game. So they have even more weapons that they didn't use. This team is absolutely loaded on offense, and I'm really excited to see how they play next week. And yeah, what do you think? You think that some of these other players will have to factor in if they're going to win next week, or do you think that with what they put on the field this week, that this team can go far?
Well, I think they're facing another really good defensive team this week, so I think it'd be good to have as much weapons on the field as they can.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. But Tom Brady is just really playing at a very high level of football again. I know some people were saying, "Oh, he dipped off a little bit at the end of last year. He wasn't the same Tom Brady." But it looks like he's gotten back into the form that he usually is in the playoffs. Moving on to the Sunday slate of games, we had the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Tennessee Titans. I know in our predictions we went the opposite way. You took the Baltimore Ravens and I took the Tennessee Titans. The Ravens did come up on top with a score of 20-13. They got one more touchdown. Um, Lamar Jackson had a fantastic game. He uh, really proved himself in this game that he can win in the playoffs. I know he'd been questioned a lot in the past. He threw for 179 yards, and but that was just through the air. On the ground, he ran for 136 yards and a touchdown. J.K. Dobbins added 43 yards on the ground and a touchdown. And then through the air, Marquise Hollywood Brown had 7 catches for 109 yards. Mark Andrews, 4 catches for 41 yards. And yeah, this team just looked like a well oiled machine. They could run the ball, they could catch the ball. Lamar Jackson, he couldn't be contained in this game. They looked really solid in the victory here. And then looking at the Tennessee Titans, they had a rough day. Ryan Tannehill, 165 yards. He did throw for a touchdown, but also an interception. Derrick Henry only rushed for 40 rushing yards, which is very surprising. And I think that was one of the main factors, Baltimore being able to stop the rushing offense for the Titans. In the receiving game, A.J. Brown, 6 catches for 83 yards and a touchdown. And then Anthony Ferkser added 2 catches for 44 yards. And the rest of the team was pretty quiet. They didn't do too much. Nate, what were your thoughts on this game? Baltimore getting the victory and how they looked in this game.
I think the defense of the Ravens has to get a lot of credit because there's not a lot of teams out there that can stop Derrick Henry like that. Like only 40 yards. Like whenever you ever heard of Derrick Henry only getting 40 yards.
Yeah, this guy's been putting up 150 plus in a lot of the games this year. I think he averaged, what was it, 138 yards per game, like something insane like that. He had an amazing, I know he had over 2,000 rushing yards this season. He had one of the more memorable seasons for a running back, but then he was just silenced in this playoff game. So, yeah, what do you think about the Ravens going forward?
Um, they, I think they have the tools to make a deep run. And for Lamar, he had a 77, I mean, not 77, 70% completion rate. So imagine if he just throws the ball more.
Yeah, I think that some teams might zero in on him on the ground, so he definitely will need to throw the ball more against other teams. He's just got to make sure that he's just focused. He doesn't panic and just run around too much. Like when there's a strong pass rush, like quarterbacks can start to panic. They can run around. They can make rushed plays, rush passes, that kind of thing. So hopefully, Lamar just stays steady the way he has been, and then he can continue to move forward in the playoffs. And yeah, looking at the game after that, it was the New Orleans Saints against the Chicago Bears, and both of us kind of knew who we thought was going to win. We picked the Saints, and we were correct. They won 21-9 in this game. Chicago really didn't get much offense going in this game. Mitch Trubisky just threw for 199 yards and a touchdown. David Montgomery only had 31 yards on the ground. And in terms of receiving, Allen Robinson, 6 catches for 55 yards. And then Jimmy Graham adding 2 catches for 25 yards and a touchdown. And there just really wasn't much to go around for the Chicago Bears. That touchdown actually came late in the game with the clock at 0 in the fourth quarter. So the Bears really didn't get any offense until the final 2 minutes of the game. So it was really tough to watch the Bears offense. Their defense did do a pretty good job against the Saints, although Drew Brees threw for 265 yards and 2 touchdowns. Alvin Kamara rushed for 99 yards and a touchdown. And then you had Deontay Harris catching 7 receptions for 83 yards. Michael Thomas, 5 catches, 73 yards, and a touchdown, with Jared Cook adding 4 catches for 40 yards. The Saints just did what they needed to do to win this game. And I don't know, do you have any other thoughts on this game?
Well, they're looking like a dangerous team. I know like the Bears don't have the best offense, but to shut a whole team down until 2 minutes in the fourth, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, like Chicago just really didn't generate a lot of chances. Um, I know the Saints do have more to give when it comes to offense. Chicago just had a really good defense as well. It was a very defensive battle. So I think Next week, New Orleans will have the chance to put their offense to the test. And then going to the final game on Sunday, your Cleveland Browns, even though you didn't believe in them last week, they got it done. And I mean, they got it done in amazing fashion. They won 48-37. The score is definitely closer than the way the game looked. It got out of hand really early. um just breaking down the way it started, they put up four straight touchdowns in the first quarter, went up 28-0. I believe at halftime they were up like what, 35-10 or something crazy like that. Like it was amazing how it went. Actually, let me check here. When halftime, yeah, it was 35-10. That was the score at halftime. And then yeah, they just didn't release the gas. Pittsburgh tried to come back in this game. They did a good job making the score close at the end, but in reality, this game wasn't really close. Before I get into the stats, just what are your thoughts on Cleveland in this game?
Well, this was the complete opposite. I think what most people were expecting. Like I said, Hunt and Chubb were just gonna punch holes as a joke. I I knew they were gonna be good, but I didn't think they were gonna be that good, and I wasn't expecting the defense to get a pick six on the first play of the game either. I don't think anyone ever saw that coming.
Yeah, it was either a pick six or there was like a fumble. I think there was some kind of miscommunication going on there at the. I think the ball got flipped over Ben's head, and then it was rolling around the 5 yard line or so. And I think they picked it up and got the touchdown. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. And then yeah, there was just a lot of interceptions thrown. Looking at the Pittsburgh Steelers, Ben Roethlisberger did throw for 501 yards. He had an amazing second half of the game. First half though, he had four interceptions total in the game. He threw for four touchdowns but had four interceptions. So it was more of a back and forth game for Roethlisberger. James Conner only had 37 yards on the ground, but he did add the rushing touchdown. Juju Smith-Schuster had a good game, 13 catches for 157 yards and a touchdown. Deontay Johnson adding 11 catches for 117 yards, with James Washington adding five catches for 72 yards, and Eric Ebron adding seven catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. And Chase Claypool also having two touchdowns to go with his 59 receiving yards. And yeah, Pittsburgh really produced on offense. They just took too long to do it, and their defense just really didn't help them out. What are your thoughts on why Pittsburgh's defense just didn't come to play this game?
Well, I'm not really too sure to be honest because their defense is really good, but I think the Browns just have enough versatility to kind of they can they can kind of like solve problems on offense. Like even if you stop the run, there's two really good running backs, and Baker's just been looking really good. Like I think they had like third stringers on the O line, and he was getting they were trying to do like a pass rush almost every play, and Baker was just like he was throwing within 2 seconds
Yeah, he
almost
looked
every
really good.
play.
Yeah, I was noticing that as well. Pittsburgh really just couldn't get into the pocket against him. And yeah, he threw for 263 yards and three touchdowns. Nick Chubb rushed for 76 yards. Kareem Hunt rushed for 48 yards and two rushing touchdowns. And then in the receiving game, Jarvis Landry, five catches, 92 yards, and the touchdown. Nick Chubb, four catches, 69 yards, and the receiving touchdown. Austin Hooper had seven catches for 46 yards and a touchdown as well. And yeah, this team was just so well rounded in this game. Their defense played fantastic. Their defense needed to play better than Pittsburgh's defense to win this game, and they definitely did. You could see the way this defense played, especially from the beginning of the game with that. I believe it was a fumble recovery, and then there was an interception on the next drive. So it was a very interesting way for this game to start. And then yeah, the finish was definitely something that Cleveland fans were hoping for. And then going forward, what does Cleveland need to do if they're going to have any chance of moving on in these playoffs?
I think they're gonna need to continue to tighten their defense. Like their defense was looking good. They were getting a lot of picks and they were forcing Ben to do like really risky plays, which obviously blew up on him. I think if they're gonna have any chance next week, they're gonna have to force Mahomes to do the same somehow. And I think they're gonna also have to not let the team try to catch up. Like it almost backfired when they were giving up too many points to the Steelers, and you can't do that to the Chiefs. The Chiefs are gonna burn you if you do that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think definitely with Kevin Stefanski rejoining the team this week, he'll be able to sort of sort through a lot of the issues they did have in the second half of this game and sort of just realign this team and get them ready to go for next week. Um, after this game, I just wanted to take a look at the playoff teams that were eliminated. So we'll start with the Indianapolis Colts, and I just want to look at one playmaker on the offense that they could potentially part ways with, or I think they should part ways with. And then I just want to get your thoughts, just so that the listeners can have an idea, maybe who they might not see on these teams next year for fantasy. For the Indianapolis Colts, I have running back Marlon Mack. I believe in week 1 or 2, he tore his Achilles, and that kind of paved the path for Jonathan Taylor to get his workload. And then Jonathan Taylor just had the big breakout season for the Colts. And then with Nyheim Hines just sort of being that pass catching back, and he also did an amazing job in his role. So I feel like with these two younger backs in the backfield, I think that just leaves Marlon Mack expendable. I just want to get your thoughts on that. That's just a thought of mine that I believe he might be a free agent. I'm not 100% sure, but if he is, I don't think they'll be taking his option. I think they'll just be letting him go to free agency, especially if he does, like I've been hearing, want to be a starting running back still. What are your thoughts?
I can definitely see that. Marlon Mack has just gotten an Achilles tear, and normally that's like that's like a really bad sign for an athlete. Normally their explosiveness goes down by a lot, and that's a really big problem for running backs. They need that athleticism. So I think the Colts might want to try to go for someone younger.
Yeah, I think Jonathan Taylor did show that he is the running back that they envisioned in drafting in this past year's draft. He really just proved that he's that explosive runner that they were looking for on first and second down. And then Nyheim Hines has just been amazing in catching passes in the backfield on third downs and so on. And even in the red zone, both running backs really played amazing this year and factored into the Colts' amazing run game. So yeah, I do see Marlon Mack as the expendable player in this offense. Just going on to the next game, the Seattle Seahawks. I just believe that most of this offense will be here to stay next season. Guys like Russell Wilson for sure, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, guys like Chris Carson will most likely be around still. I think that the most expendable player they have is Greg Olson. I know they did sign him this past off season, but he's gotten a lot older now. They can always roll with both Will Disley and Jacob Hollister at tight end, or they might want to draft someone in the draft, maybe just get younger there because Olsen also dealt with a lot of injuries this year. So there's a chance that he might retire and go into broadcasting like he originally planned. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's going to be a theme for a lot of these veteran teams. They've had players that were really good for a long time, but it seems like they're slowing down and they might need to look for someone else.
Yeah, I think also with the salary cap not rising next season, they're going to be forced to cut ties with a lot of veterans with bigger contracts as well. Guys that normally you might keep around for another year, you'll just cut ties with. And yeah, what do you see out of the Seahawks offense this season, assuming they do move on from Greg Olson?
Um, it's kind of hard to say because they're usually good every season, but I think they're just gonna, I guess, need to find a way to push past some tough defenses. It might not necessarily even be like they need a new player. It could just be this was just a bad game. Like sometimes you just have bad games, right?
Yeah, and also for years the offensive line has been really letting Wilson down. He's had to scramble a lot just to make plays. I think also maybe getting a younger tight end in there might be able to help in terms of blocking. with the offensive line, that kind of thing. So I think maybe if they do release Greg Olson and they maybe move towards someone younger, I think that might help them in terms of blocking as well. I know Chris Carson's a very explosive runner, and they've really they could have parted ways with him for multiple seasons, but they decided to keep him on because they like the way he runs. They like the way things are going with him. So yeah, I think Olsen is the most expendable person in this offense. And then looking at the Washington football team, the only player I could really find, I know they have a younger core. The only player I really thought that might be expendable is Alex Smith, just because of all of his injury history. It's a very extensive injury history, and then also the way that Henneke played this past week. He looks very promising. They could either move forward with him or they could draft another quarterback, which would make Alex Smith expendable. What are your thoughts on Alex Smith possibly being cut from the Washington football team?
I could definitely see that. Washington football team is like they're I guess they're on the cusp of being able to make deep playoff runs. They just need a good quarterback who can kind of lead them there.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, they'll probably be trying either in free agency or the draft, and that's definitely gonna make Alex Smith expendable.
Yeah, I feel like they have a lot of good young talent. They've got Antonio Gibson at running back. They have Terry McLaurin and both of the Sims guys as their receivers. They have Logan Thomas at tight end. They have a really solid uh, um, bunch of skill players. They just need that one quarterback to be put in there. Alex Smith, don't get me wrong, he had a fantastic run this year, but with his injury history, he's not reliable enough, is what I'm saying. And I think they need to upgrade to someone more reliable this offseason.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Moving to Sunday's eliminated teams, we'll start with the Tennessee Titans. And one thing I did want to mention with the Titans, I know everyone talks about Derrick Henry only having 40 rushing yards, but Corey Davis didn't catch a pass on Sunday at all. No receiving yards. And Corey Davis has put up multiple goose eggs this year, along with very good games. I know he had a breakout year this year, but I think that he might be the player on this offense that they can afford to part ways with just because of his inconsistency. AJ Brown, fantastic receiver. Tannehill loves him. Tannehill will target him. He'll always be getting catches. Derrick Henry, amazing running back. In terms of their tight ends, both Jonnu Smith and Ferkser seem to be working well in this offense. I know they had Jonnu blocking a lot more this year. Ferkser was catching a lot more passes, and then the roles kind of reversed here and there. So they both seem to be doing well in the offense. And then Ryan Tannehill seems to be really fitting in as this quarterback. I think that the expendable receiver or sorry, skill position player in this team would be Corey Davis. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
I could definitely see that because they were needing to be able to throw to somebody to beat the Ravens, and you can't have a player that drops passes and doesn't really produce for you like that. And I think outside of upgrading your defense, trying to get another reliable wide receiver is probably one of their only options right now.
Yeah, I think wide receiver is definitely the offensive position that they can improve on. I know their offensive line hasn't been amazing, which is what could have led to Derrick Henry's bust game this week. I know he's overcome a lot of the deficiencies in this offensive line, but when you're up against a strong defensive line in terms of like teams like the Ravens, teams like the Rams, Washington football team, these teams have strong defensive lines. It's really hard to run the ball with a weaker offensive line. And yeah, I think that that's definitely something Tennessee could also look at. But yeah, Corey Davis just seems like the logical option in terms of someone that might be expendable for this team. Moving on to the Chicago Bears. I know everyone wants to talk about how Allen Robinson didn't want to stay, but I think what player they might really want to move on from. I know you could talk about Jimmy Graham, but Jimmy Graham did have a very good season, above expectations for both his age and the suspected role he was going to have in this offense. He really overproduced. So I am going to go with Mitch Trubisky on this. They didn't take his I believe, fifth year option. They didn't take it. So, which means he is going to become a free agent this summer, most likely. And I don't see him returning with the Chicago Bears because I feel like that uh, they need to upgrade to someone as his offensive potential is very limited in this offense. We saw Allen Robinson's frustrations, and I think if Trubisky does move on, that increases the chances of Chicago being able to keep a guy like Allen Robinson, who, in my opinion, is one of the top 10 receivers in the league with his talent. And yeah, running back David Montgomery really stepped forward this year. He took a major step forward. They'll be getting Tariq Cohen back next year from injury, so they'll have that third down pass catching running back that they really struggled with that this year because they didn't have that guy. And yeah, in terms of the tight ends, whether it's Jimmy Graham or Cole Kmet, they'll have two reliable tight ends, or they'll have the one that seems to be playing better, and then also wide receivers. Darnell Mooney and others, yeah, they'll be on the cusp as well in terms of receiving. So I just believe that they need to upgrade their quarterback position. What are your thoughts on the Chicago Bears offense and possibly them moving on from Mitch Trubisky?
I think they're gonna probably want to look for someone who can just make plays on offense, someone who is a little bit more reliable. Um, Trubisky, he is like okay, but he's not a playoff quarterback, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I can see that. And in terms of the Chicago team, like they have an outstanding defense, and they just need, I believe, that one piece, and I believe it is the quarterback. Because I mean, if Robinson is the one that becomes expendable and you replace him with someone, is that really going to fix the offense? I don't think so. I think they really need to address the quarterback position. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, if your wide receiver is like top 10 in the league, I don't think replacing him is going to be a good idea.
Yeah, I that's the thing though is with him not being satisfied, if they do keep Mitch Trubisky, they could risk losing him, and then that would just downgrade the offense as a whole. And yeah, it would just be a rough situation for Chicago fans. Yeah, I think that Trubisky is definitely the one that needs to go in this situation.
I agree with that too.
Yeah, and then moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And this team went 11-0 to start the year. They finished with a 12-4 record. They went into the playoffs. And I mean, their offense did perform really well. But I think in terms of a team standpoint, the person that I really think that they need to part ways with is Juju Smith-Schuster. Reason being, I believe he is a free agent this summer, and he is going to be looking for a longer term contract. And uh, both reasons for Pittsburgh. The first one being he seemed to be a very big distraction this season for the team. I'm not criticizing him as a person. I'm just saying that a lot of the things he did might have been a distraction, might have been motivating for other teams in terms of like all the dances he was doing. Also, his influence on young receiver Chase Claypool. They really expect Claypool to be a big part of the Pittsburgh Steelers' future, and with the way that him and Juju were sort of being a distraction for the team. I don't think that that was good for them. And then, yeah, in terms of him being on the field, I believe they'll be parting ways with him because I do believe that they want to keep Deontay Johnson as he was their best wide receiver this year, and then Chase Claypool is their best young talent. So in terms of the three main wide receivers, I think he'd be expendable. Eric Ebron could be another one, but he had a good end to the season. I know he struggled early on and in the middle of the season, but he was pretty good in this playoff matchup. And then James Conner might be leaving on his own, but I don't think that he is sort of the main issue for this offense. They don't have a run game in general. So I feel like if they develop a run game, they could just put in another running back there and do well. I don't think they're just solely reliant on James Conner. So I think that the real issue here is potentially moving on from Juju Smith-Schuster. But what do you think about this?
I was actually wondering about your thoughts on Ben Roethlisberger.
Mhm.
I know a lot of people are saying he's getting old. They might need to get a new quarterback. Me personally, I think he's still good, but the age thing is kind of setting in, and he was basically trying to play like he's still in his prime. But I think at this part of his career, he needs to kind of, I guess, play like he's aging, right? Like he can't just try to break tackles from O line guys anymore.
Yeah, I think that in terms of Ben Roethlisberger, I don't think he was the issue in this offense. He said that he's going to come back if the Steelers want to bring him back. So he's doesn't have plans to retire. He just threw for over 500 yards. You rarely see that in a football game. Usually players go over 300 yards in a game on a good night, but 500 he played a really good second half, especially of the game. I just believe that this offense as a whole just wasn't strong together. And I think that could be with a lot of the distractions that were going on. I know a lot of people have felt that maybe the culture on this team needs to be changed. Maybe that's why you feel that Ben Roethlisberger might need to there might need to be a changing of the guard in terms of their quarterback, but I just don't believe they have that quarterback. And then from where they're drafting, I don't think they'll be able to get a high end quarterback. So I think they just might need to keep Roethlisberger around for 1 or 2 more years. Um, I think they might get a running back in the draft, whether they get someone like Najee Harris from Alabama or someone in that range. Whoever they might get might be able to replace James Conner if they don't want to sign him to an extension. And then in terms of wide receivers, yeah, they have Johnson, Claypool, and also Washington had a good game on Sunday as well. So if they do move on from Juju Smith Schuster, I think that they'll still be okay in terms of their offense. Yeah, if you have any other thoughts on Pittsburgh, you can go ahead.
I would say that like again, they're one of those teams that like we thought they were going to make a deep playoff run, but the Browns were just playing really good. They were on fire. Like it's just that they have like maybe one or two weaknesses. One of them being the running game. So they just need someone who can kind of improve the running game a little bit, and they'd probably be able to make another deep run again.
Yeah, I think that Pittsburgh has the pieces on defense to be able to play great. They just kind of had a meltdown this past game. I believe as players like T.J. Watt, and I know they'll be getting some of their injured players back as well. And as they continue to grow and improve, I think that their defense will be solid for years to come. It's just that offense might need to be tweaked up a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with that.
All right, let's now move into the preview for this week's divisional round matchups. All right, let's jump into the NFL preview for this coming week's divisional playoff matchups. Nate, it's nice to be chatting with you about the NFL. And yeah, let's hop into the first game. On Saturday, the early game is going to be the LA Rams at the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay coming off a bye, LA coming off their win against the Seattle Seahawks last week. In terms of players that might be great for daily fantasy or playoff pools, um, definitely the Green Bay offense. Even though they are against a stacked LA Rams defense, you should be able to trust guys like Aaron Rodgers, uh, Devontae Adams, obviously, also potentially Aaron Jones, and then tight end Robert Tanyan. Nate, I just want to ask you, do you think anyone else from Green Bay will factor in, or are those just the main guys? This is a tough Rams defense.
I think those are going to be the main guys. I was going to say Valdez Scantling because like Aaron Rodgers has been like making him really good. I remember he was getting like Valdez was getting like 20 points per game in like fantasy. So he could potentially pop off if they need another wide receiver to throw to. But I would say um you may or may not want to pick him up, depends on how you feel.
So he's more of like a riskier tournament type play then is what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess for people that play daily fantasy, you'll know that if you're playing for cash, you'll want to go with people that are more reliable, guys like Devontae Adams and so on. But if you're playing in a tournament, you want to go for guys with high potential but low ownership. So someone like Valdez Scantling, I assume, would be one of those riskier plays that you take for maybe like a playoff tournament or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. And then moving over to the Rams, I think I would avoid Jared Goff in this matchup just because Green Bay is one of the better passing defenses in the league. they've just done very well against guarding the pass. So I think a guy like Cam Akers at running back might be a good option for this team. You might see Robert Woods get some runs and some catches. So I think he might be a little bit better than a guy like Cooper Cup, who, I mean, you could probably roll him in if you don't really like a lot of the other options from other games this weekend. But I don't really like any of the tight ends in this game for the Rams. Is there anyone I'm missing, Nate, or is that pretty much it?
I was actually thinking about the kicker. I don't remember the name off the top of my head, but he got, I think it was like 12 points against the Seahawks. And with the Packers defense, they're probably going to be looking to him to get some clutch field goals. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're playing cash, you don't pick kickers, but I think for tournaments, you choose kickers. So yeah, if you are in a playoff tournament and you're choosing a kicker, I guess if the Rams don't find the end zone, they'll definitely be trying a lot of field goals. So that would definitely be an option for you there. And then looking at this game, the way it's going to play out, who do you see taking this game?
I still think the Packers have an advantage. The Rams have a really good defense, but so do the Packers. And I think the Packers have a better offense overall. And Goff still has that thumb injury, I believe. Um, I think he only got one touchdown, so there's a possibility that they're gonna probably be leaning to Cam Akers a bit more.
Yeah, I think that they can lean to Cam Akers because Green Bay has sort of been on the rough end in terms of their rushing defense. It has improved as they did stop Derrick Henry a couple weeks back, but yeah, I think I'm gonna lean with Green Bay as well. I just feel like Aaron Rodgers is just on a power trip this year. He's just really showing what he can do in this offense, and Devontae Adams has really become that high end recognized receiver in the league, and he can make plays. He's an amazing route runner. He can do all sorts of things, and then they're balanced. They have Aaron Jones also in the backfield producing. They Some people have called him Alvin Kamara 2.0. So I mean, hey, he's been a good runner this year. So yeah, I think I'm gonna lean with the Green Bay Packers in this situation, but this could actually be a game that's closer than a lot of people expect it to be. Moving on to the Saturday evening game, it'll be the Baltimore Ravens at the Buffalo Bills. Baltimore coming off their win over the Tennessee Titans, and the Bills coming up with their win over the Indianapolis Colts this past weekend. Just looking at potential daily fantasy players for these teams. For the Bills, Josh Allen, um, Stefan Diggs are the two main guys. I know this Baltimore defense is a lot tougher, but I think if there's two guys that you can 100% rely on, it's those two. Is there anyone else from the Bills offense? What are your thoughts on that?
You could look to Cole Beasley. I know that when Stephon Diggs is getting guarded too closely, sometimes Josh Allen likes to throw to Cole Beasley, and he's pretty reliable. So you might want to look to him.
Yeah, I think that the Ravens slot cornerback is their most vulnerable cornerback. So I think Cole Beasley playing out of the slot. I believe he had 7 receptions this past week, so that's definitely good volume for him, and I think that he can definitely be a good player. And then in terms of their run game, I know Moss got hurt, and then Singletary really hasn't been as consistent. I believe their best runner is still Josh Allen
Yeah, he's the best passer and the best rusher on the
for
team.
this team. Yeah, I think so. And then moving on to Baltimore, I think you can roll with Lamar Jackson. J.K. Dobbins as well has been fantastic as a running back for this team, stepping into the number one role. I think you can roll with Mark Andrews at tight end. He's been finding the end zone almost every week now, coming up with usually at least 5 catches per game, which is pretty good for considering tight ends this year has been kind of tough. Mark Andrews will be in most lineups. I think that if you're doing a daily fantasy lineup for this weekend, I think you'll see Mark Andrews picked as the tight end for most lineups, as tight end's pretty thin right now in the playoffs. And then you can look to Hollywood Brown also. He's had a good string of excellent games. I believe he had close to or over 100 yards in this past week's game. So I think Baltimore definitely has a good group of options. Is there anyone I'm missing, and what are your thoughts on that?
Um, I think that's a pretty good number of options to choose from. I was thinking the other wide receivers, depending on how Lamar feels on his throwing game. I think that if Lamar feels more confident in throwing, the other wide receivers might open up. But I was also thinking Gus Edwards. I think thinking back to the Browns game, back in the regular season, they had a lot of problems trying to stop him. So if he gets more minutes, you might want to look to him too.
Yeah, I think also Buffalo has had some struggles with their run defense. Their pass defense has been a lot better than their run defense, I believe. So I think there is room to fit possibly two running backs. And if Baltimore does go down in this game, that is a possibility that they go down early. They could be relying more on J.K. Dobbins rather than Edwards. But then if they go up early, they might be resting J.K. Dobbins or just giving Edwards more of the carries because Edwards seems to be that more grounded pound guy, and then Dobbin seems to be more of that like all around. He can catch passes, he can do like whatever, right? So and Edwards, his yards per carry is amazing. He's been one of the best over the past couple seasons in the league. So I think they have two good options at running back, but I would trust Dobbins over Edwards for sure. And then
Yeah, I could see
yeah,
that.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I could see that.
Okay. And then yeah, looking at this game, in terms of who you think is going to come on top, what are your thoughts on this game? Who might win?
I think it's gonna be 50-50. Like you said, the Ravens have a really good run game, and the Bills have had trouble trying to stop the run game. But the Bills have a really good passing game. That being said, the Ravens are pretty good at stopping the pass. But also thinking back to the regular season versus the Browns, Baker was able to get stuff done against the defense. And I believe Josh Allen would also be able to do the same. But yeah, it's still 50-50 for me.
But who do you get the slight edge to in this game? Like, who would be your pick?
I guess the slight edge, it's hard to say. I want to say the Bills, I guess.
Okay, so you'd give the slight edge to the Bills just because you believe Josh Allen can sort of pass on this defense like Baker Mayfield did.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I take a look at this game, I sort of see a few different things. Looking back at Buffalo's matchup last week, the key players for the Colts that were able to get things done against Buffalo, Jonathan Taylor on the ground, tight end Jack Doyle through the air. And when you look at this Ravens team, they're also solid in those two areas. You got J.K. Dobbins on the ground, you got Mark Andrews at tight end, and you don't just have Philip Rivers as your quarterback. You have a dual threat in Lamar Jackson. So I think that the Bills did struggle with the Colts this week. The Colts also have a solid defense, just like the Ravens. The Bills did struggle this week with the Colts, who are not the number one rushing team. The number one rushing team is the Baltimore Ravens this season. Um, all of their running backs and Lamar Jackson combined for over 3,000 rushing yards this season. So I think that Buffalo is going to have a hard time stopping them. This game is going to be close. This is not going to be a no team's going to run away with this. But yeah, I do see Baltimore having the slighter edge. I am going to go with Baltimore. First of all, to be different from you, and also I do see the Ravens surprising a lot of people because a lot of people are just writing off the Ravens in this game. I don't think they should be written off. People wrote off the Colts last week, and they made it a game. So I think the Ravens can do the same thing this week. Any last thoughts?
I'm just thinking it's either going to be a high scoring game or a low scoring game.
Yeah, so you mean it's either going to be like a 30s game or like an under 20s game is what you're saying.
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay, so you kind of see it going that way. Um I could see a high scoring game here. because most people expect it to be lower with Baltimore and their defense. But I believe Josh Allen can score points. Lamar Jackson can also score a lot of points. It can go both ways. So yeah, I can tend to agree with you. Teams could really shut each other down in this game, or it can be very explosive. Moving on to the next game, your Cleveland Browns are going up against the best team in the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs. Just looking at this game, yeah, we'll take a look at the Browns first. Guys that you could possibly roll with in this game for the Browns, you could possibly go Baker Mayfield at quarterback, just because there's a possibility they will be playing from behind in this game, which means he's going to be passing the ball a lot, which means passing yards, which means fantasy points. Um, on the ground, Nick Chubb and potentially Kareem Hunt as well, especially like I said, if they go down and they're passing the ball more, you might see Kareem Hunt on the field more. So I think both running backs should be a factor in this game. I'm also going to go with both Jarvis Landry and Austin Hooper as potentially guys. I think Austin Hooper might be the second best tight end on the slate in daily fantasy this weekend next to Mark Andrews. Um, uh, I think Travis Kelsey's a little too high price for most people. So I think in terms of the decent picks that people might go for, I think it would be Mark Andrews and Austin Hooper. But yeah, Hooper is a very good guy to match up against Travis Kelsey in terms of if you were in sort of a going back and forth in scoring between the two teams. If the Chiefs go down the field and quickly get a touchdown, and then the Browns have to do the same thing, I feel like the Browns do now have enough good weapons to be able to do that kind of a thing. What are your thoughts on the Cleveland offense this weekend?
They definitely have a lot of weapons, and they have a lot of wide receivers that you wouldn't expect to be really good, like Higgins. I don't think people were expecting Higgins to be as good as he was this season. Um, if you're looking for an extra wide receiver, you could go with him because Baker does like to throw to him, and he's for some reason, even though he's like on paper, he's not the best wide receiver, he still finds a way to just catch the football somehow.
Yeah, so you think he might be a low end option that people can look at in maybe like tournaments or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I can agree with that. And then looking at this Kansas City offense, they've actually been resting for 2 weeks. They rest the final week of the season and this past weekend with the bye. Um, Guys you can roll with. They're going to be high end options for daily fantasy, which means it's going to be tough to fit them all in your lineup with your lineup budgets. But Patrick Mahomes, probably the best quarterback on the slate this week, considering Rodgers does have to go up against the Rams. Kelsey, probably the most expensive tight end in daily fantasy this weekend. Tyreek Hill, one of probably one or two of the best wide receivers this weekend, along with a guy like Stephon Diggs and potentially Devontae Adams. I think Tyreek Hill would be one of the best. For low end options, if Watkins isn't good to go, maybe a guy like McCole Hardman, um, yeah, maybe Demarcus Robinson. And then in terms of their run game, a Le'Veon Bell or a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, whichever one is ready to go. If Clyde Edwards-Helaire is not ready to go, um, Le'Veon Bell would definitely be the bell cow for this team. Is there anyone that I missed from the Chiefs?
I think that's pretty sounds pretty accurate to me.
Yeah, in terms of the Chiefs, you don't really know who's going to be the main guy in the game because they have so many weapons. But I think Kelsey has been the most consistent out of all of their point producers. And, Mahomes is just going to be putting up touchdowns like he normally does. It's just a matter of how many and how often. So, yeah, in terms of the Chiefs players, I think those are the people you can look at. And in terms of the game, I know you're a Cleveland fan. I know you didn't pick them to win last week, and they did come through. I just want your thoughts on this game. First of all, who you think it's is going to win, and I guess just your thoughts on the Browns this weekend.
I think on paper, Kansas City still has the advantage because they've had 2 weeks to rest. The Browns have had injury problems going into the playoffs, but they were able to clutch it out with no head coach. So I think it's going to be a close game, but I think the Browns are going to be playing from behind because the Kansas City defense is pretty good, but I don't think they're going to be good enough to shut down the Browns. But I think that um, if the defense can't force Mahomes to make bad passes like they did to Ben, they're probably it's going to be a long night for them.
Yeah, I think I think I can agree with you. I will take the Chiefs as well as in this game. Um, the Chiefs have the number one offense in the NFL. We all know that. We know they're coming in with a lot of confidence, being the number one seed. But I also know Cleveland will be coming in with a lot of confidence as well. Um, the way their defenses stack up, they had pretty similar stats throughout the season. I think Kansas City was just slightly better. Might have been because they were in an easier division. So I guess you could argue that the Cleveland Browns possibly have the better defense, depending on who's playing and whatnot. But yeah, it's just going to come down to the Cleveland offense. I think in my mind, that's really what it's going to come down to. Can this Cleveland offense respond to everything that Kansas City throws at them offensively? Because Cleveland has to stay in this game. If they go down by a big lead like the way that Pittsburgh went down against them this past week, I don't see Cleveland coming back the way Pittsburgh did. So I don't think that their offense really has that comeback mentality. They can keep up with other offenses. Like so, if Kansas City scores a touchdown, they gotta respond. I think that's the best way. Cleveland's offense goes with momentum. So they really need to rely on getting momentum and just sort of pushing back against every time Kansas City scores against them. They got to just push back and try and get a touchdown.
I will say that I think Kansas City they have been struggling before going into the playoffs. Like a lot of their games have been really close.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a possibility that if for some reason they either had too much rest and now they're rusty, there's a chance that the Browns could sneak up on them. And I will also say that if the Browns somehow figure out how to beat Kansas City, they have a chance to go all the way to the Super Bowl. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. If you beat a team like Kansas City, that's just a huge confidence booster. And then yeah, also if Cleveland somehow gets off to a quick start like they did against the Steelers, then they can sort of direct the tempo of the game because they love running the ball. And when you're in the lead and you're able to run the ball the way Cleveland does, it's going to be really difficult. Actually, the strategy I think to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, I mentioned it last week, is you have to be a very good team at running the ball, and you have to keep their offense off the field. So on your drives, you got to extend them as long as you can, waste as much time off the clock as you can before you score so that they won't have much time to get their offense on the field to be able to put together drives. And I think that's the way you have to be Kansas City because the more times Mahomes gets on the field, the more points he's going to put up. Like, let's just be honest. You got to keep him off the field for as much time as possible. And having a solid run game is one of the steps. And Cleveland does have a strong run game. It was one of the best in the NFL this year. I believe it was in the top five in terms of rushing yards this year. So, yeah, Cleveland definitely has the tools to get it done. It's going to be a tough matchup. Patrick Mahomes is clearly one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Same with Kelsey being one of the best tight ends in the league. So I think it's going to be. I know people are saying, "Oh yeah, Kansas City's going to blow them out of the water." I don't think so. I think that Cleveland can hold themselves in this game. They just can't go down early.
I would agree with that because the Steelers on paper also were ranked higher than Kansas City, I believe. And Cleveland was still able to come out ahead. So, like I said, the even though the Kansas City defense is really good, I don't think they're good enough to shut down the Browns.
Yeah, I still am leaning towards Kansas City, like I said, but Cleveland can make it close for sure.
Yeah, it's not gonna be a blowout. I
Yeah,
hope.
and yeah, you're gonna be cheering for the Browns for sure. So I believe it's gonna be a pretty good game. Yeah, just looking forward to the Sunday night game. It'll be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the New Orleans Saints. These two teams played twice this year, with the Saints winning both games. First the opening week's matchup, and then also the midseason matchup as well. Looking at the New Orleans Saints, potential options for fantasy, for daily fantasy this weekend. Um, a guy like Drew Brees is a possibility if you're looking for someone at quarterback. He's not at the higher end of quarterbacks, but he'll still put up points for you. Running back Alvin Kamara, obviously. No matter what defense he faces, he produces. I think he ran for almost 100 yards, even on Chicago's tough run defense. Wide receivers, I think Michael Thomas is the main guy that you have to look at here. Maybe Jared Cook at tight end. Um, and then I don't know who else you like from the Saints team. If I forgot someone, you can mention it.
I guess possibly Taysom Hill because of his versatility. I think that if it gets close, they might look to him to kind of make some plays. They could probably put him in at like any position. They're not going to put him in at quarterback because they have Drew Brees, but if they need like an extra weapon, they might look to him.
Yeah, I think the only way that I would recommend playing Taysom Hill for weekend fantasy is if he's not slotted at just the quarterback position. If you can throw him into a flex spot, he has that eligibility, then he could be a recommendation. But if he's just listed as a quarterback, I don't think he's worth starting because I don't believe he'll be able to put up as much points as you'll be getting from other quarterbacks. Looking at Tampa Bay, this offense has just been flying. I think you can go with Tom Brady at quarterback. You can roll with, well, check the running backs. If Ronald Jones is still not playing, I think you can roll comfortably with Fournette. If Ronald Jones is playing, it might be tough to see who gets more rushes. I know they lean toward Jones a little bit more, but Fournette had a really good game last week. He looked a lot better than what we saw from him earlier in the year. So I guess you'll just have to wait for reports. Wide receivers, Mike Evans had over 100 yards. Both Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin had touchdowns this weekend. You might even be able to roll with all three. And then at the tight end position, both Gronk and Cameron Brate, they're not as reliable as other tight ends. I think I might lean more to Gronk this week if you're looking at maybe someone in a tournament that you might want low ownage, high upside. Gronk would be that guy. Brate, I don't know how many catches he's going to get. It'll probably be tough for him to find the end zone as well. So if I'm going to recommend a tight end for them, I think it will be Gronk. Is there anyone I'm missing from the Bucks, and what are your thoughts?
Um, I think that seems pretty accurate to me. I mean, what I'm thinking is that uh, there's going to be a lot of wealth to be spread. The Bucks, they honestly they're looking like what the Falcons were supposed to be, because like you have a perfect storm of Tom Brady and a bunch of good wide receivers and a good running back. They just need a good tight end, but I think Brady still he's gonna find a way to get a lot of points.
Yeah, and I think that even though they haven't been using Gronk as much in the receiving game, I believe his blocking role, he's a very good blocking tight end as well. So if Gronk can sort of get to that level where he was in the playoffs back when he was on the Patriots, I feel like that Brady can definitely rely on him as that main tight end that he might be looking for.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, just looking at the way this game is going to play out, who do you see taking this game and how do you see it playing out?
Um, I think it's also gonna be really close, but I'm just feeling the Bucks. I think that the Saints defense is really good, but so is the Bucks defense, and I think Tom Brady is just he. I think he's looking a little bit better than Drew Brees this season. I know Drew Brees has been like really banged up. He had that rib injury. His lungs were punctured, and he came back. He's feeling better, but um, I still think that the Bucks offense is probably gonna edge out a little bit, but it'll be close.
Yeah, I think you're right about this game being very close. I guess you were comparing both sides. If we compare both defenses, they're both very solid. I might give the slight edge to the Saints on defense, just because they have a lot of playmakers both at the line, at the middle, and in the back with their safeties and corners. Tampa Bay's not a pushover either. They have a lot of good players, namely guys like Jason Pierre-Paul and many others as well. they have a lot of good playmakers on defense. In terms of the offense, this year I think Tom Brady is playing better than Drew Brees. I can agree with what you said there. In terms of running backs, I'll lean towards Alvin Kamara in this matchup being the best running back over whether they play Jones or Fournette. And then in terms of the receiving options, I just think it's endless for the Bucks. The Saints, they'll have guys like Mike Thomas, maybe Emmanuel Sanders will factor, Jared Cook, others. But when you're lining up Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Rob Gronkowski, and Cameron Brate in a five set, that's dangerous. And they even have Scotty Miller to stretch the field. Like we haven't even talked about him. He's been big in some games this season. Um, the Saints have won the two matchups against the Bucks this year, but I don't see the Bucks losing three in a row to the Saints team. I just don't see it. Tom Brady knows that they've lost two games against the Saints. And this is playoff Tom Brady. This is not regular season Tom Brady. So I think I'm going to stick with the Bucks too. I actually see them winning. I have them penciled in. If you remember last week for the Super Bowl against Kansas City, I believe you went Green Bay against Kansas City. Was it?
I think so. I don't really remember, to be
Yeah. So
honest.
I think both of our Super Bowl picks are safe as of now. But we'll have to see after this week if either Kansas City, Green Bay, or Tampa Bay gets eliminated this week. So we'll have to check that out. Anyways, yeah, it's going to be a great set of games this weekend for the divisional playoffs. Any last thoughts?
Um, I was just gonna say that the state of football is like looking really good into the Super Bowl and to next season. There's gonna be a lot of moves in the off season, and I think especially the AFC is gonna look even more stacked compared to this season. So yeah, so a lot of good games in the future to be had.
Yeah, well, I mean, a 10-6 team missed the playoffs in the AFC. So, I mean, yeah, you're right. It is getting stacked there. So, yeah, there's a lot to look forward to both this weekend and in the coming days. Now we'll move over to the NBA portion of the podcast where we'll talk about some pickups and some games on the slate. All right, welcome to the basketball portion of the Fantasy Fanatics Podcast. I'm joined once again by Terry and Mete. What's up, guys?
What it do? What's going on?
Yeah, let's just jump right into the NBA pickups for this week in fantasy basketball. There's been a lot of COVID-19 going around the league lately, and you might be on the short end of some of that in terms of your lineups. And yeah, you might need some good fantasy players to pick up. So we'll just jump right into pickups. I'll start off with Austin Rivers, and at first you might think, oh, he plays for the Knicks, but actually he's been putting up solid stat lines over the past couple weeks. He's actually even been getting over 30 minutes of playing time since COVID-19 started going around the league, and since injuries have started building up for each team. He's been also putting up solid stats, usually hovering around 13 to 15 points per game, adding about five or so rebounds and about three or so assists. And he's averaged at least one steal per game, which is also pretty good, as well as both his field goal and free throw percentage won't hurt you. So I think that he is a solid pickup. He's only around 25% owned. I believe he was added at least 25, almost 25% within the last week, as he was under 5% owned before. So if you're going to jump on him, you should do it soon before he has a higher own percentage. For my next player pickup, I'm going to go with Justin Holiday. He actually had been in the starting lineup this week and he had been producing at a very high level. I know he might step out of the starting lineup this week, but even outside the starting lineup, he's been chipping in almost every single category. He's been filling up the stat sheets. I think one game he even had four steals, but he's been averaging one or two steals per game. His field goal has been around a point 0.5 recently, which is very good. That's not something to be taken lightly for a player that plays at the guard position. And yeah, he's just covering most statistical categories in fantasy. He was added over 10% in the last week, so people are really picking up on him and are adding him up. So add him up before he goes over 50% in most leagues. And then just jumping to my last pickup, I'm going to go with Carmelo Anthony. I know that he did have a rough start. I believe he started out either with COVID or with an injury. He had something going on at the beginning of the season. But lately, he's just been playing a lot better. He's been dropping close to 20 points per game, and he's been adding rebounds, assists. I believe last game he also had 2 steals and 2 blocks, which is really good for his fantasy value. Also shooting at around zero point 0.4 per game, which is not bad. And his free throw is almost perfect. So you can't go wrong with adding Carmelo Anthony. And he's close to 40% owned. So he's also another player that you need to hop on quickly before someone else in your league grabs him. Uh, that's my pickups for the week. I'll just jump to you, Terry. You said you have some pickups to add as well.
Most definitely. First guy I gotta go over is Hamidou Diallo from the OKC Thunder. I know for sure he's on Yahoo. He's probably shooting guard and small forward eligible, and I know for a matter of fact that he's probably give or take 38% owned in Yahoo leagues. What he brings to the table is going to be a six-man coming for this OKC Thunder team, with George Hill being the starting two guard now, along with SGA. Someone on the bench is going to have to provide, and I believe Diallo is going to be the guy for that. Um, for the past 7 games, I believe he probably is producing around 19 points, 5 rebounds, give or take 3 assists, as well as 2 steals a game. On top of that, he isn't going to trash your field goal percentages because I believe he's averaging 63 from the field right now. Only negative is at the charity stripe, he's going to be under 70, give or take, from the stripe. Next guy is going to be Gary Harris. With Michael Porter Jr. being injured or out due to personal reasons, I believe Gary Harris is going to be the main guy on the wing that you're going to look out for if you're looking for a guy on the Denver Nuggets. He's shooting guard and small forward eligible, and I know for sure he's probably around under 25% owned in most Yahoo leagues. Uh, from the charity stripe, he probably averages 75%, and then from the field, he probably averages give or take 60 for the past 7 days. Um, Give or take, I guarantee he'll give you 2 3 pointers a night, 15 points, 3 rebounds, maybe around 1.5 assists and a steal. My final guy, probably in the shallower leagues, got to be Enes Kanter. I mean, he's still under 50% owned in Yahoo leagues, and if you need that third or fourth center on your roster, he's your guy. He's going to give you probably your points and rebounds, but aside from that, I believe that's it. Um, he's probably going to average you as well as a 68% from the field, but as a center, he is going to take your charity stripe numbers.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've been talking about Canner for the past 3 weeks, and I'm surprised that he hasn't gotten over 50% ownership yet. He's definitely one of the players that we've been recommending that you jump on consistently on the waiver wire. And Mete, I'll go to you. Who are your 3 pickups for the week?
So the first player I have to keep an eye on is Daniel Tice. I picked him because Tristan Thompson got hurt on Wednesday against the Heat, so that should open up minutes for him. And he's a solid player. Like he's a good defender, so he could get you steals and blocks. He can shoot the 3-pointer, and he doesn't try to do too much. So usually he won't be taking too many shots, so his field goal percentage shouldn't be too bad. As I'm looking right now on ESPN.com, it's showing me that in the month of January, actually, he's shooting 66%, which is amazing. The second, and I'll add that he's 47% owned and he plays center position. The second player I have is Chetty Osman. The Cavs, they have a lot of injuries going on right now, like every other team, a lot of injuries going on, COVID. So it's opened up a lot of minutes for him. In the last 5 games, he's gone over 30 minutes every game, and he's a solid player. He'll get you points. This year, he's gone better at getting rebounds and assists and defensive stats too. One problem is he's inconsistent, so he could have nights where his field goal percentage is really low. And He plays small forward, power forward positions on fantasy, and he's 19% owned. And the last guy I have is Robin Lopez. He's kind of like Tice. I have him because Thomas Bryant went down a couple of games ago, and he's now the starting center for the Washington Wizards. They played a game last night, which he doubled actually, 11 points, 11 rebounds. So I think he's a solid veteran, and if you need a center and you're really desperate, he's only 13% owned, so you could probably pick him up.
Yeah. All right, that's good. Yeah. Terry, let me go right back to you. You said you had some deep league pickups. Could you share those with us?
First guy I gotta go over is probably Lonnie Walker, the fourth out of San Antonio. He's probably under 20% owned, maybe around 20% owned as of the recording. And I know for sure he's going to be small forward and shooting guard eligible. What he provides to you is basically simple. He's going to average you 14 a night, 3 rebounds, probably 2 assists, and knowing that he's one of the more athletic guards in the association, he's probably going to average you maybe a steal and a half a game. For his percentages, unfortunately for a guard, he's probably going to average you under 75 from the field. From the charity stripe. And from the field, he's going to average you maybe 43. My next guy is a guy from Indiana. His name's Doug McDermott, if you ain't known him by now. And in deep league, or even in regular leagues in general, he's only 10% owned, maybe even less. With TJ Warren out for Lord knows how long, he's going to be the next guy up on the wing. I guarantee you he's going to average you probably 2-3 pointers a night, 13 points, maybe 3 rebounds and assists. And my last guy, his name isn't really the first guy you would come to think of for centers, but his stats are great when it comes to 9 category. His name's Kelly Olynyk of the Miami Heat, power forward and center eligible. And on top of that, he's averaging from the field, I believe, 46%, as well as, unfortunately, 66 from the charity stripe. But from the past 7 days, he's given us 3 3-pointers, probably 14 points, 5 boards, and 2.5 assists. And that's what I got for you when it comes to deep league pickups. And I know for sure for Kelly, unfortunately, his stock is rising, so he might not be 20% owned anymore. He might be around the 30 to maybe 40% range.
Yeah, I think we did mention him last week as well. So these guys that we consistently mention week to week are definitely people that you should be jumping on in terms of pickups. Just going around the league, I just want to get some of your reactions to some of the games that have been going on this week, as well as just to look at the general place of each team. Mete, I'll start with you. Your Toronto Raptors haven't been looking as great, dropping, I believe, 3 out of their last 4 games. Might even be a longer losing streak than that. What do the Raptors need to do to turn things around?
There's a couple issues, I think. First of all, our rebounding needs to get better for sure. We're giving up way too many second chances, and we're not getting as many second chances as other teams. Also, noticing a problem in closing games for us. We've gotten these last 2 games against the Warriors and Blazers, we've gotten into a situation where we get the lead. We're under a minute and we just can't close it out. So it's really frustrating right now, and I hope they could turn it around.
Yeah, the Raptors really need more bounces to go their way, and they just need to play a better overall all-around game. All right, Terry, let me get to you. What are your thoughts on the Charlotte Hornets? They're on a 4-game win streak right now, and how do you feel about the development of LaMelo Ball?
Well, he was considered the guy coming out of this draft class. Even with the shortened training camp, you got to appreciate how he's just adapted into this grown man's league. And it's not just him alone. You got other guys that have filled the roles of the supporting cast. You got Bismack Biyombo, you got Terry Rozier, You got Bridges in Washington as well, just providing whether it's off the bench or in the starting lineup. And you got to appreciate the head coaching from the Charlotte Hornets team.
Yeah, they seem to be playing very well as of recently. I know LaMelo Ball was the youngest player to get a triple double in an NBA game, so that's very impressive as well. Mete, let me get to you actually. The Denver Nuggets had a rough start in the Western Conference, but they have been playing better as of late. Do you believe Denver will be a playoff team, or do you see them continuing to falter like they did at the beginning?
Oh no, Denver is definitely a playoff team. On my predictions, I think I had them top four or something. So it was just a rough start at the beginning, but I'm sure they'll pick it up.
Yeah, they just seem to not have things clicking at the beginning of the season, as well as some other teams. I know some teams that battled through COVID, um, and especially some of the top teams. Like I know Dallas has dealt with it, as well as teams like Boston. The Miami Heat have had COVID go through their locker room, and just some other teams as well, like the 76ers. Um, Actually, back to you, Meti. I just want to get your thoughts on who's a team that's really surprised you in the East this year.
For the East, I would probably have to say this is going to be kind of surprising, but the Magic, because even though they were a playoff team last year, I just thought the East got better and they really didn't improve in the offseason, but I was definitely wrong. So they're fifth right now, and I think when I did my predictions before the season started, I didn't have them in the playoffs. So they're playing solid right now.
Yeah, and then bouncing to you, Terrio, in the Western Conference, just a team that's maybe surprised you early on. I know Houston's been one of the more disappointing teams in the West right now, but in terms of a team that impresses you, who do you see impressing you in the West?
Honestly, one of the teams that really impressed me is probably the Phoenix Suns. I believe at the moment of the recordings, I believe they're probably third in the Western Conference, and they've just lost a game, or they have just lost a game, and I believe they're probably 6-4, maybe 7-4 in the rankings. So you just got to appreciate this young up and coming team just finding the way in this tough Western Conference.
Yeah, I think everyone expected Phoenix to be better with the acquisition of Chris Paul, but no one expected them to ascend the way that they have. And then, yeah, just getting to you guys in terms of games going on this week, in terms of a game that I'm really excited and looking forward to this week. On Friday, the Warriors will be playing those Phoenix Suns. Both teams looking really strong. I know the Warriors struggled early, but they've been on a tear as of late. Steph Curry looking like his old self and a potential MVP candidate this year. So I feel like that's going to be an exciting game to see what happens. All right, Mete, I want to get to you. What's a game that you're really looking forward to or you're really interested in viewing this week?
So I'm really interested in the matchup between the Nets and the Bucks that's coming up on Monday, the 18th. And I think this is going to be a great matchup, especially if Kyrie and KD will play. And I guess it depends on Kyrie with his personal reasons and not showing up to games and recently being punished for being maskless around his family, I guess. I'm hoping he can play. If not, I still think this could be a great matchup. Even though the Nets are struggling right now, they have good amount of depth at the guard position. I think that they could make up for Kyrie with just Kevin Durant.
Yeah, I think that that's still an interesting matchup, even if Kyrie doesn't play. Yeah, the Nets looking to rebound from their recent struggles, and then the Bucks just continuing to surge forward. Terry, I'll get to you on your thoughts of a game that you're interested in viewing this week.
The first matchup I saw this weekend was probably the Pacers and Suns on the Saturday tab. But when I looked at Sunday, there was probably even a better one. It had to be the Utah Jazz versus the Denver Nuggets. Um, Honestly, it's a former playoff matchup. We knew what happened last year between these two teams, and I feel like there might be a little bit of bad blood, even though it's at the start of the year, and probably you're going to have a couple of players taking it easy. I feel like the Utah Jazz have something to prove, just due to the fact that the Denver Nuggets do have their number when it comes to playoff time. The names are there. You got Nikola Jokic, Paul Millsap, Jamal Murray, and then on Utah side of the ball, you always got Rudy Gobert, Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell. Um, these names don't always pop out, but these teams play like uh, some of the most well-oiled machines across the league, even though their records do not show it. Utah's at the moment is 6-4, and I believe the Nuggets at this moment are 5-5. But I guarantee you, this is the matchup to watch this weekend.
All right, yeah, that sounds like an intriguing matchup in terms of the slate this weekend. And once again, I want to say thanks, guys, for your input on both the fantasy pickups and the games ahead this week in the NBA. Right now, we're going to move on to the NHL portion of the Fantasy Fanatics podcast.
Welcome back to the hockey segment of the Fantasy Fanatics Podcast. I'm your host, Nathan, and I'm with the hockey expert, James Kumar.
Hey, what's up, man?
Hey, so today we're going to be looking at the West Division for the NHL, and we're going to see who's fantasy relevant from the World Juniors, and we're going to we're going to look at some upcoming games for the NHL this week.
All right, that sounds good.
All right, so let's start with the NHL West Division, and we'll start with the Anaheim Ducks.
Yeah, let's take a look at the Anaheim Ducks. This is a young and upcoming team, so there aren't too many fantasy relevant players from this team. Ryan Getzlaff, when he's healthy, can definitely contribute in most categories for you in fantasy. His scoring has dropped down, but he still takes quite a lot of shots. He'll play on the top power play, and he'll generate a lot of hits. His plus minus might drop a little bit this year because of Anaheim not being one of the better teams in their division. But I think he'll still be fantasy relevant from the forwards as well as forward Ricard Raquel. I think he is their best goal scorer as of right now. And I believe that he could get between 15 and 20 goals if he really continues to break out in his goal scoring. Some defensemen to look at from Anaheim, newly acquired Kevin Shattenkirk. He's more on the offensive side in terms of their defensemen. So he's someone you could look at if you wanted maybe a fifth or sixth defenseman on your team, as well as someone like Cam Fowler. Who should see pretty good power play time for the Anaheim Ducks. He has had good fantasy seasons in the past. I know he's dropped down a little bit, but hopefully he'll get his production back up.
Sounds good. And who are some underrated players on this team?
One sleeper I'm going to look at is Trevor Zegras. I know everyone got to see him in the World Juniors, and we'll talk about him more in the World Juniors segment of this podcast. But I think that he's definitely a sleeper that should be looked at as he is looking to jump straight into the Anaheim Ducks lineup after the World Junior Championships. And I think that maybe you might be able to get him at the end of your drafts, maybe in the second last or last round, and he should be able to turn in some value this year for you in fantasy.
Sounds good. So, how do you feel about the goalie situation?
In terms of the goalies, it's just going to be John Gibson again. He's one of the best goalies in the league on an underwhelming team, so his stats may struggle because of his team, but I think he's still a solid goalie. And if the Ducks do rebound a little bit this year, he'll definitely be one of the more valuable fantasy goalies. But you'll definitely need to temper your expectations as we don't know how much better the Anaheim Ducks will be this season.
So, it sounds like the Anaheim Ducks are a temper your expectations kind of team this year.
Yeah, I think that based off of last year, they had a hard time scoring a lot of goals. So I can't really project a lot of forwards to be fantasy relevant, as well as their defensemen. But they're a solid team defensively. So John Gibson should probably be the best fantasy option from this team, I think.
Sounds good. And now we go to the Arizona Coyotes. And what are some top players for this team?
Yeah, let's look at some of the top players from the Coyotes. Clayton Keller, he's their brightest young forward. He did take a step back last year from the previous couple seasons, but I think that Clayton Keller can be the best offensive player for this team. It's just a matter of him, finding the right line mates and so on. And yeah, the Coyotes moving on from Stepan might provide different line mates for Keller, and that might prove to be better for him in terms of fantasy. Also, Phil Kessel, they acquired him last year from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he kind of had a slow year. But I think another year in the Arizona system would be beneficial for Kessel. I know he's on the older back nine of his career, and I think that he might not produce as much as he did in Pittsburgh or in Toronto, but I feel like he'll still be a decent fantasy player for you. He'll get you some goals, definitely get you some points on the power play, and so on. And then in terms of their defense, looking at defenseman Oliver Ekman Larson, it doesn't look like he's going to be traded this year. So he should be in Arizona and logging all of the top minutes for them. So he'll definitely contribute in fantasy, as well as defenseman Jacob Chikrin. I know a lot. I've seen him going in drafts, as the fourth or fifth defenseman for teams, and I think that is good value for him. He's definitely the second best defenseman on that team offensively, so he should definitely produce for you in fantasy.
Sounds good. And what are some sleeper picks for this team?
Oh, sleeper pick. I'm going to go with Connor Garland. He had an amazing rookie year last year, scoring more than 20 goals in his rookie season. And I've seen him not even being drafted in most leagues this year. I'm actually surprised. I've seen him mostly ranked outside the top 200 a lot of times. And Garland's going to get every opportunity to play for this team. He'll most likely be on one of the top two lines, probably be on the top power play. And I think Garland can actually improve from his stats from last year. He generated a lot of shots as well. So he's definitely someone that could be a sleeper. If he's not even being drafted, you could just even draft him with your last pick in the draft and just take a flyer on him or whatever, and he should be able to produce for you this year.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the goalies?
The goalies for this team, Darcy Kemper and Antti Ranta, they're both solid goalies. Darcy Kemper, before he got hurt last year, was actually in the running for the Vezina Trophy for goalie of the year, so he was really playing well. And Antti Ranta has been one of those injury-prone goalies that's a very excellent goalie when he's healthy, but he's not always in the lineup. So I think Darcy Kemper is the main guy. I'd say he's probably in the top 15 goalies this year for Arizona, and then Antti Ranta might be like a third goalie, and a lot of times he might not even be owned in fantasy. But if they are splitting starts, Ranta's value will definitely come up. But Kemper should be the guy for Arizona this year.
Sounds good. So it sounds like for Arizona, they definitely have some valuable players on this team.
Yeah, they do have some valuable players. I know they've had trouble scoring at times, but I actually think that Arizona has the potential to be either a playoff level team or maybe even a little bit lower than that. We're not sure exactly where they're at. So definitely you got to temper expectations in terms of scoring. But in terms of defense and goaltending, they're one of the best teams in their division for sure.
Sounds good. And next we go to the Colorado Avalanche. And what are some top players on this team?
Yeah, there's a lot of top players on Colorado. They should be one of the top three offensive teams in the league this year. Forward Nathan McKinnon, he's a superstar in this league. He's a top three player in fantasy. Some people are taking him first overall over McDavid even because of his category coverage. He'll just cover goals, assists, power play, plus minus, shots, hits. He does everything for you in fantasy. He's that like one man machine for you. He'll like carry your fantasy team. So he's definitely going as one of the top three picks in the draft, along with both McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. And then line mate Mikko Rantanen, I've seen him go inside the top 10 players in fantasy drafts. He's being drafted really high, and it's because of his upside playing with McKinnon that Rantanen can be taken that high. I know he's had injury issues, so I'd probably draft him just outside the first round, like maybe the mid second round, but that's just me tempering things in terms of injuries. But yeah, Rantanen is definitely has the upside of a first round draft pick. And also line mate Gabriel Landeskog is one of the other category covers. He'll cover hits, shots, goals. He'll play on the power play. You know, he's just one of those players as well. And then second liners, both Nazem Kadri and Andre Burakovsky last year proved that they were amazing players. Kadri definitely covering the shots and hits portion, as well as being a good goal scorer. And then Burakovsky just being a really good point producer. And a lot of people are suspecting that Burakovsky could even move onto the first line if they decide to move Landeskog down. So I think that Burakovsky has a lot of upside heading into this season for the Avalanche. As you can tell, they have a lot of scoring options on this team for fantasy. We'll go to the defense. They have a lot of good defensemen. I'm just going to talk about Cale Makar because Cale Makar should be one of the top 5 defensemen taken in fantasy. He'll play on the top power play. He'll score goals, assists. He'll get everything. He was the rookie of the year in the league last year, and he's even expected to take a further step forward this season. I mean, guys like Ryan Graves, Sam Girard, Devon Taves, and others, even Bowen Byram. We'll talk about him in the World Juniors section. Those guys are expected to put up points for the Avalanche, but if you're talking about their best defenseman, it's definitely Cale Makar.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the sleeper picks on this team?
For the sleeper pick, there's actually a lot of sleeper picks on this team. There's a lot of good guys you could take flyers on. I went with Brandon Saad. They just acquired him this summer from the Chicago Blackhawks. He could slide into one of the top 2 lines this year. He's been one of the fantasy producers that will cover a few different categories, and if he does get exposure in the top 6 of this team, he'll definitely be putting up a lot of points for you. He'll have a good plus minus and so on. So Brandon Saad is definitely someone that you can take a flyer on in fantasy drafts.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the goalies on this team?
In terms of the goalies for this team, both Philip Grubauer and Pavel Francouz should be fantasy relevant. They'll probably be splitting starts. I say Grubauer will get just a few more starts than Francouz, but Grubauer also has proven he hasn't been healthy. Both goalies weren't healthy last year, actually. So the playing time is probably going to be somewhere down the middle, favoring Grubauer a little bit. So Grubauer should be taken close to the top 10 in goalies for fantasy drafts. And then Francouz maybe outside the top 20 somewhere. They're definitely both going to have good stats playing for Colorado, as Colorado is one of the best teams. They actually have a chance of winning this division. So they should have a good record this year. So both goalies should be fantasy relevant.
Sounds good. And yeah, as you said, this is possibly a deep playoff run title contending team this year.
Yeah, there are a lot of people taking the Avalanche to win the Stanley Cup. I know they had some hiccups in their run last year, which is why Dallas was able to eliminate them on their way to the finals. But yeah, the Avalanche look like they're going to take a step forward this season, both in the regular season and in the playoffs.
All right. So next we go to the Los Angeles Kings. And who do you think are some top players for this team?
Yeah, the LA Kings, they're still finishing their rebuild. They had their 2 Stanley Cup championships in 2012 and 2014, and then most of that team got older, so they've been rebuilding. So they have a mix of veterans and young players on this team. We'll start with Anze Kopitar, their captain. He's been the mainstay offensive player for this team for a long time, and I believe he'll continue to do that this season. He covers the majority of categories, and in terms of a team that might be really bad in terms of plus minus, his plus minus won't be as bad as most players, as he's very good defensively. So he's definitely one of the safe options from the LA Kings for sure. And then I also went with Dustin Brown, because Dustin Brown's one of those guys that he's usually top 5 in the league in hits every year. And he's on the power play. He'll score some goals. His offensive output is not where it used to be, but he's definitely someone that's still valuable in fantasy. And then in terms of their defense, Drew Doughty is still the guy. He's just entering his 30s, so he's still really has a lot ahead of him. And people say he's faded a little bit as a defenseman, but I think that he can still be an effective defenseman, and he'll definitely put up points for you in fantasy this season.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the sleeper players on this team?
Yeah, there's a lot of players you can go with. LA has a lot of young talent. In terms of talking about someone that not everyone's talking about, I'm going to talk about Gabriel Velarde. And he actually jumped into their lineup late last year as a rookie, but he missed a lot of time due to injury. So he's technically still a rookie this year. He didn't play the minimum number, or the maximum number of games before you're technically a rookie. So he'll be entering this season as a rookie, and he should have a roster spot this season. He should chip in offensively for this team. He's seen as one of the players coming in that's definitely going to be a big part of the future core for this team. So if you have a late round pick and you see Gabe Velarde there in the draft, yeah, you should go ahead and take a flyer on him. He could end up being one of the better rookies this season.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the goalie situation on this team?
The goalie situation on this team is very interesting. Jonathan Quick's been the goalie here in LA for a long time. He backed them to 2 Stanley Cups. But yeah, he's definitely on the older side, so he definitely won't be as effective as he was before, especially on this rebuilding team. Backup Cal Peterson is looking to get more starts this year. I figure that these two goalies will split starts. I don't know how valuable they're going to be for fantasy, just because I don't know how much LA is going to win this season. So if you draft either of them, I'd suggest drafting Quick first. Peterson might be relevant later in the year if he gets more starts, but if you draft Quick or Peterson, just temper your expectation for them, especially in terms of goals against average and save percentage, as they might be allowing a lot of goals if this team isn't sound defensively. So I think there are better goalies out there, but if you're in a deep league, I would take a flyer on one of these two goalies and just see how they perform over the season.
Sounds good. So the Kings seem more of I guess, a deep league team in terms of fantasy.
Yeah, I think that they have a lot of guys that could really break out. We just don't know which guys are going to break out. So it's kind of just playing off of which guys are safe, which guys you can sort of get value out of, and then we'll see as the season goes along for them.
Sounds good. And now we'll go to the Minnesota Wild. And who are some top players for this team?
Yeah, let's talk about the Minnesota Wild and their top players. We'll start with Kevin Fiala. They acquired him in a trade last year from the Nashville Predators, and he just had a breakout. I'd say he was in the top 10 or 15 scorers in the last portion of the season. Like, he just went on a tear. And then even in the play-in round against Vancouver, he was clearly the best player for Minnesota offensively. He just really has an amazing shot. He's an amazing talent. He'll definitely be scoring goals. He'll be playing whichever line he's playing on will be the top line for this team. And he's just going to be putting up points for this team, because someone needs to score goals for Minnesota. They're sort of in a transition period right now for their team, and he seems to be that guy. Also, Kirill Kaprizov, he's one of the top rookies coming in. He's projected to be one of the finalists for the Rookie of the Year this year. So he's going, I'd say, in the middle of drafts, maybe the 8th or 9th round. I've seen Kaprizov getting drafted. He's definitely a guy to be looking at if you're looking to add some rookies on your team that are going to be projected to score a lot of points. Kaprizov is one of those guys. Also, forward Zach Parise, he definitely chips in a few different categories. He'll be on the power play. He'll get you hits, a lot of shots. He'll get some goals. He'll get some points. Parise's just had trouble staying healthy, but when he is healthy, he's an effective fantasy forward. In terms of their defense, they have a few good defensemen. Ryan Suter's been a good fantasy defenseman for a long time. He gets a lot of minutes, so he'll definitely be producing for fantasy. And the best offensive defenseman I think they have is Matt Dumba. He usually plays on the top power play, and he's generated a lot of scoring opportunities. In terms of defenseman, he gets a lot of shots. He definitely hits. He definitely does a lot of the things that contribute to fantasy points. And then new captain Jared Spurgeon. He definitely has been fantasy relevant in recent years. He definitely puts up points for fantasy, and his plus minus is usually really good. So for some defensemen that you might want to take, those are three guys from Minnesota that should be fantasy relevant.
Sounds good. And what are some sleeper picks do you would have for this team?
The sleeper pick I took was Marcus Johansson. They got him in a trade from Buffalo. I believe it was from Buffalo this year. And yeah, they wanted to convert him to center, but it looks like he's playing better on the wing, so they're going to keep him there. They have high expectations for him, which means that the coaches want to give him an opportunity to play. So you should see him on one of the top two lines. And if he is playing with guys like Fiala and Kaprizov, one or the other, he's definitely going to get points. He's going to get prime offensive chances with these guys. So he should be able to put up good points for you in fantasy as a sleeper.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the goalies on this team?
For the goalies on this team, Alex Daylock was placed on IR indefinitely, so we don't know when he's going to come back. So newly acquired Cam Talbot should be the starting goalie for this team, and he should see most of the starts. As of right now, unless another rookie comes up and plays, this should be Cam Talbot's net. And he was a decent goalie last year for fantasy. He was owned quite a bit when he was in Calgary, so he can put up decent stats for you. He's definitely not a top goalie for a fantasy team, but maybe a second or third goalie is recommended for Cam Talbot when you're drafting goalies.
Sounds good. So it seems like Minnesota's pretty solid this year.
Yeah, I think they're solid defensively for sure. The offense leaves more to be desired, but we'll see which guys break out this year on offense for Minnesota.
Sounds good. And now we go to the San Jose Sharks. And who do you think is a top player for this team?
Yeah, they have four forwards. I think that should be fantasy relevant and should be consistent for fantasy. Evander Kane is one of the best category covers in fantasy. He's been one of the top hit getters most years. He takes a lot of shots. He usually scores quite a bit of goals. He will definitely be close to 20 goals this year, if not actually get 20 goals. Their San Jose captain Logan Couture is definitely another player. He's usually their top point producer from season to season, and he'll definitely be on the top power play and playing top minutes as the top center for this team. Thomas Hurdle is one of the best offensive talents that the Sharks have. He definitely produces at a good level when he is healthy. So it's important that he does stay healthy this season. That's one thing he struggled with. And then Timo Meyer is definitely one of the goal scorers that's blooming on this team. And I believe Timo Meyer will be playing with Logan Couture most of the time. So he should have good opportunities to score points for this team. In terms of defense, they have two of the better offensive defensemen in fantasy, Brent Burns and Eric Carlson. Burns kind of had a down year last year. I expect him to rebound and put up similar, maybe not close to, but hopefully a little bit better than last season, and hopefully closer to what he put up when he won the Norris Trophy for Defenseman of the Year a couple years back. And then Eric Carlson, since joining the Sharks, he's battled through injuries, different other things. So he's definitely one of those bounce back candidates on defense. If he can get back to the level where he was playing before, he definitely be like a top 5 defenseman in fantasy. So both of these defensemen should be taken within the top 10 or 15 defensemen in fantasy because they're definitely two of the better offensive defensemen in the league.
Sounds good. And what do you think of the sleeper picks on this team?
It was tough for me to actually find a sleeper pick on this team, someone I thought that could, have late round value in fantasy. But I did go with Ryan Donato, and They acquired him from Minnesota. He wasn't getting top end minutes with the Wild, but if he can slide into a top six role and maybe play with someone like Thomas Hurl, or maybe even play with Logan Couture, he could definitely chip in some points. I think he had like, what was it, almost 15 goals playing like third or fourth line minutes. So he does have potential. And I think that if he realizes his potential in San Jose, he can definitely be a decent fantasy player this year.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the goalie situation on this team?
In terms of the goalie situation, Devin Dubnyk just came in from Minnesota to join Martin Jones as the two goalies for this team. A lot of people are saying Devin Dubnyk is going to be the starter for this team, but I actually think it's going to be more of a split in terms of starts because Jones was the starter last year, and they did say that they expect Jones to have a bounce back year this year. So I think that these two goalies will split starts. In terms of whether you should own them in fantasy or not, I'd actually wait until the season starts before you pick up any of these goalies. Just because we don't know how San Jose is going to play. If they play as bad as they did last season, none of these goalies are going to be fantasy relevant. But if San Jose gets off to a good start, then you'll kind of tell which goalie is playing better, and then that's the goalie that you can pick up as maybe your third goalie for fantasy.
So it seems for San Jose, it's like a wait and see kind of team.
Yeah, they're kind of a team that should bounce back and be better than last season because they did deal with a lot of injuries, but we still got to wait it out and see.
Sounds good. And now we'll go to the St. Louis Blues. And who are some top players for this team?
Yeah, looking at the St. Louis Blues, some of their top forwards, Ryan O'Reilly is one of the best category covers in fantasy. He'll cover goals, assists. He'll be on the top power play. He'll have a good plus minus, shots, hits. The Ryan O'Reilly's that dude for the St. Louis Blues. Also, Braden Shen is one of the best scorers on that team with Vladimir Tarasenko um, possibly not playing this season. Braden Shen's going to be called upon to score a lot of goals for this team. So he's definitely someone that's very valuable for fantasy, as well as forward David Perron. Perron's been one of the better goal scorers for St. Louis over his recent tenure there. He's usually on the top power play, taking shots from the left side, and he's definitely one of the better fantasy players in terms of just pure points. And then recently signed Mike Hoffman should slide in on the right side of the top power play. He's one of the best one-time shooters in the league. He'll score a lot of goals in fantasy. Defensively, he's not as good. His plus minus might hurt you, but other than that, shots, he's usually right up there, close to the top 10 of the league in shots. And yeah, just with St. Louis needing that like pure goal scorer with Tarasenko being out, I feel like Hoffman could be the guy that slides into that role. And then also forward Jaden Schwartz. He's more of an underrated guy, but I feel like he's still one of their top scorers, so I'll include him here. Yeah, Schwartz is definitely a guy that's been very, very valuable in fantasy in the past. I've owned him a lot of years, and I can definitely say that he's one of the better fantasy players that I've had. Looking at defense, recently acquired Torrey Krug should be the top defenseman for this team. He'll be scoring lots of points, both even strength and on the power play. His plus minus, it hasn't been great in certain years, but being on St. Louis, it should be a little bit better. So you might not get hurt by his plus minus this year. And definitely, he's one of the defensemen that takes a lot of shots. And then another defenseman is Colton Parayko, who also should step up in his role with Captain Alex Pietrangelo being gone from the St. Louis Blues. Parayko should step into a larger role with this team and definitely produce offensively.
Sounds good. And who do you have as a sleeper pick for this team?
For sleeper pick, I went with Robert Thomas. I know a lot of people have been saying that he's been a sleeper. I actually think that he is definitely a sleeper for this team. He just seems to have more to give in terms of his offense. He's one of those guys that, could push his way into a top six forward role for this team, and he could just really break out as a player. I could see him potentially even, getting top end power play minutes. So I think that maybe he might be there. I think he's been going just before the 200 mark in fantasy drafts. So I think that if you can get him there, like maybe in the 180s, 190s, he's a good pickup to add to the end of your bench or whatever, and he should produce for you in fantasy.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the goalies on this team?
Uh, for in terms of the goalies of this team, I think Jordan Binnington should be the guy for them this year. He did have a rough end to the season last year, but I feel like that him being on a solid team like St. Louis, he should be one of the better fantasy goalies. He's been going, I believe, either in the top 10 or top 15 because of the amount of games he's going to start. Because they don't really have a solid backup because they traded Jake Gallen last offseason. So I think Jordan Binnington will definitely get the bulk of the starts and he'll definitely be able to get a lot of wins and should have good averages in fantasy.
Sounds good. And now we go to the Las Vegas Golden Knights. And what do you think about the top players for this team?
Yeah, Vegas should be one of the best teams in this division. I know when I was doing predictions earlier, I had them penciled in as first place in this division, and rightfully so. This team is talented. Forwards Max Pacioretty and Mark Stone are their two top scorers. They're always putting up points, whether it's goals at even strength, scoring on the power play. They usually have good plus minuses. They take lots of shots. They're both very valuable forwards. And then forwards Jonathan Marchessault and Riley Smith usually play together on the same line as well. And they just produce points, not at the level of Pacioretty and Stone, but they can definitely produce for you in fantasy. And then center William Karlsson, I know he's not at the level he was in his first season with Vegas, where he had a huge breakout season for goals, but he's still a solid fantasy player that can chip in a few different categories for you in fantasy. In terms of the defense for this team, definitely Alex Petrangelo coming from St. Louis to join Vegas has really made this team stronger defensively. And I believe Petrangelo will be the top defenseman for this team. He'll probably play on the either the top power play or the second power play. And he just has good plus minus. He gets lots of hits, and he'll put up a good amount of points in fantasy, as well as defenseman Shea Theodore. Theodore had a breakout last year in the playoffs where he actually led Vegas in scoring, I believe. So he's really talented offensively, and he can definitely become a top 10 fantasy defenseman this season.
Sounds good. And who do you have as a sleeper pick for this team?
There's a few guys I could have mentioned. I just went with Alex Tuck. I know he's dealt with injuries a few years, but he's definitely that guy that if he stays healthy, he can score a lot of goals. He gets a lot of hits. He's a player that can definitely contribute in different parts of fantasy. I don't know what his power play role is going to be. He should get some power play time, so I think he will be fantasy relevant. He's definitely one of those guys that's maybe a late round sleeper, like maybe second last or last round that you can just draft and be like, oh, he's on a good team, so he's not going to hurt my plus minus. And if he's healthy, he'll score some goals. So he's that kind of player that you can take a flyer on for sure.
Sounds good. And what do you think about the goalie situation?
The goalie situation for this team is interesting. You have Robin Lehner, who defined himself as the starting goalie for this team last year in the playoffs. But then you also have Marc-Andre Fleury, who was the starting goalie for them last season. So they both should be splitting starts this season. Lehner might be getting the slight edge in terms of starts, but I believe they'll both be fantasy relevant with how good Vegas's defense is. They both should put up excellent stats. I know their win totals might not reach some goalies from other teams, as those goalies will be starting most of the games. But in terms of averages and shutouts, they'll definitely have a good amount for you in fantasy. So I'd say Lehner's probably like a top 5, top 6 goalie to be drafted. And then Fleury might be in like the top 15, top 20 range in terms of goalies, but they both should be owned in fantasy for sure.
It's kind of crazy how Vegas is like the newest team and they're an expansion team and they're already this successful.
Yeah, it's just they've done a good job in terms of picking their players from the expansion draft, as well as making trades and just signing players in the off season. They've kind of developed this good team. I know they've mortgaged some of their future to be successful now, but yeah, they seem like definitely another pick that of a team that could win the Stanley Cup this coming season.
Sounds good. And now we'll go to the World Juniors. And what did you think?
Yeah, I was cheering for Canada there in the finals. It was kind of disappointing that they didn't score anything Congrats to the Americans on the victory, but I just want you to know that hockey's still Canada's sport.
We might have to pick another sport. Might have to pick cricket or something.
Yeah, well, we've been losing most sports battles to the Americans. It's tough losing in hockey as well. Hopefully, we'll get them next year.
Hopefully, at least we don't have to wait 4 years like the Olympics.
Yeah, well, the Olympics is coming up, so if they let NHL players go, I think Canada will definitely have a good chance at getting gold.
That'd be pretty stacked, like an all-star team as an Olympic team.
Yeah, for sure. You got guys like McDavid, Crosby, and McKinnon on one line. That's pretty unstoppable.
Yeah. So speaking of World Cup, um, we'll start, I guess, with Tomasino. And what do you think about his fantasy relevance?
Okay, so looking at some of these players that came out of the World Juniors that could potentially make their NHL squads this season and might have some fantasy value. Yeah, like you mentioned, Philip Tomasino. He has been playing well in terms of being in Nashville's training camp, and I think that he actually can make their team. He was a solid player for Canada this year in the World Juniors, and definitely Nashville's looking for that spark offensively, and Tomasino could be that guy that could slide in and maybe get a role in their lineup this coming season.
Sounds good. And what do you think of Thomas Harley?
Yeah, Thomas Harley was a solid defenseman for Canada in the World Juniors. Dallas is sort of looking for that bottom pair defenseman to bring in and to play, and I think Thomas Harley can actually be that guy this season. I know some people are projecting him to actually play for the Stars this season, and I think that if he does play, he might actually have some fantasy value depending on how much they play him. So we'll see how that goes.
Sounds good. And what do you think of Marco Rossi?
Yeah, Marco Rossi was interesting. Minnesota wanted to bring him into their camp, but he really wanted to play for the Austrian team, an Austrian team that's very void of a lot of talent. So in 4 games that he played for them, he didn't have any points, and he also got injured as well. So I know it's going to be tough for him to start the season with Minnesota because of his injury, but I think when he gets healthy, he should be able to jump in and score for them. And also being a center, I know a lot of Minnesota fans are excited about there being a potential line of Rossi, Kaprizov, and Fiala. They're sort of saying that that's the future for Minnesota. So if he does end up playing with them, I know fans are going to be really be asking for those 3 players to be put on the same line.
It's been kind of unfortunate for Rossi for his season situation with the injury, but hopefully he'll be able to come back soon.
Yeah, for sure. And the next player I have is Ville Heinola, defenseman for Finland. He really looked solid this year in the World Juniors, and he's also looked really good in the Winnipeg Jets camp. The Jets have sort of been void of a lot of good defensemen. So Heinola being one of their top defensive prospects, if he can come in and play a role for them this season, it could really help put them over the edge and potentially get a playoff spot this season.
Wow, so the Jets are going to be even deeper now.
Yeah, I mean they're already deep at forward. His defense has just been their main issue, and if they can kind of fix that, I mean they're a solid team. They're definitely a team that people should be looking out for this season.
Speaking of depth, what do you think of Bowen Byram?
Yeah, I actually mentioned Bowen Byram earlier when I was talking about the Avalanche defensemen. They have so many good defensemen. They have Makar, Graves, Girardi, and Devon Taves, and adding Bowen Byram to that list of amazing young defensemen. Like this Avalanche team has just endless amount of top end defensive prospects coming in. Byram was one of the top defensemen for Canada. I believe he was Canada's top scorer on defense, if I'm not mistaken. And he is just looking like an amazing prospect. And if he does make this Avalanche team this season, there is a chance that he will be fantasy relevant, as they could even put him on the second power play unit. So look out for Bowen Byram if he makes the team.
Sounds good. And what do you think of Byfield?
Actually, I'm going to take a look at 4 and 5 on my list. Alex Turcotte and Quinton Byfield, both centers for the LA Kings. Byfield, of course, playing on Team Canada, and Turcotte playing on Team USA. Both of them had amazing World Junior tournaments. I know Byfield had that 6 point game, and then Turcotte had a really good game both in the semifinals and in the finals against Canada. So I think that I know Turcotte has an injury right now, but between the two of them, they'll be fighting for probably that third line center spot. I think Byfield does have the edge right now, but in terms of which player is more developed, I think Turcotte is more developed right now. They're just going to give him time because of the injury. So I think you can expect Byfield to make the NHL first. But if Turcotte also makes it, I expect both of them to, rise up in the rankings and potentially be good fantasy players for the Kings down the road.
So it seems like the Kings are going to improve a lot this season if they can get both players.
Yeah, I think so. One will definitely be in the lineup, but if both of them get in, that would be amazing. And yeah, speaking of Team Canada, Dylan Cousins was the best player for Canada in this tournament. He put up the second most points in the tournament. He really scored a lot of key points for Canada in the World Juniors, and he's looking to make the Buffalo Sabres roster this season. I believe he can do it. I believe he has the talent to do it. I believe Buffalo could use a talented player like Dylan Cousins. So if he does make the team, expect him to put up some points, and he should be relevant for fantasy.
Sounds good. And he's not too far from the border, so any Canadians who live in the US can go see him.
Yeah, when the border opens. Hopefully the border will open soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, speaking of Canadians, Ottawa Senators fans should be really excited about Tim Stützle. He looked amazing for the German team, a German team that didn't have a lot of talent, but Stützle was one of the top end talented players in this tournament. I've ranked him at number 2 in terms of fantasy relevant players from the World Juniors because I believe he's just arrived at the Ottawa camp and he's ready to go. He's ready to jump into a top 6 role for this team. As a rookie, he could actually be the leading scorer for this team right out of the gate. That's how talented he is. He was the third overall pick in the 2020 draft by Ottawa. And yeah, his ceiling, it's just endless. He can be a top end player for the Ottawa Senators. So expect him to have some fantasy value moving forward.
he sounds like he has like all-star potential pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, when you take a player in the top 3 in the NHL draft, I mean, you got to expect him to be a high end talent. So I think Tim Stützle is definitely that guy.
Sounds good. And what do you think of Zagras?
Yeah, Trevor Zegras was the MVP of the World Juniors for the Americans, and he just looked amazing. Anaheim has a special prospect in Zegras, and yeah, I mentioned him earlier in the sleepers for the Anaheim Ducks. He's definitely should be a must own for fantasy. He's definitely a late round pick. I've seen even people reaching for him, in rounds 9 or 10 because they really believe that he's going to get an opportunity with the Anaheim Ducks. So if he's available in your league, go ahead and pick him up if you need another center. And he should be the most fantasy relevant player from these guys in the World Juniors, and I think he'll definitely be a good producer in fantasy.
Sounds good. So if you really enjoyed watching the World Juniors, I think you're going to really enjoy the NHL season this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of good young talent coming in this year. Like we didn't even mention young players like Alexis Lafreniere. He didn't participate in the World Juniors, but he's definitely being the first overall pick from this past year's draft. He's definitely a player to watch. We talked about Kaprizov earlier. There's many other young stars coming into the league this season. They'll be exciting to watch.
Sounds good. And speaking of this NHL season, we'll talk a little bit about some games that we're looking forward to. And what do you have for Thursday?
Yeah, for Thursday, well, I'll just go through and mention one interesting game I have for each division. Which games I might be interested in tuning into. In terms of the matchup. I know opening night everyone's interested, so I'm not going to mention any matchups from opening night. I'll look a little later in the week. Yeah, we'll start with Thursday. Calgary is going to be at Winnipeg, and I think that that's an interesting matchup because these two teams faced in the play-in round last year for the playoffs, and the Jets really they got beaten, and they got beaten because two of their top stars, Mark Scheifele and Patrick Laine, got hurt in the first game of the series, and then they didn't look the same offensively, and they just really got dominated by Calgary. But now that this Winnipeg team is healthy, I want to see how these two teams match up, as this is gonna be a very exciting game to watch for sure.
It's the revenge game, pretty much.
Yeah, I think that Winnipeg definitely wants to get revenge for what happened in the play-in round. Yeah, moving to Friday, from the West Division, St. Louis is playing in Colorado against the Avalanche, and these two teams, they were in the old Central Division, and yeah, they're rivals. They're both excellent teams. This is going to be a great game to watch. If you want to see a game that might potentially have some high scoring, this might be a game that could be high scoring, and it'll definitely be exciting for sure.
That seems really interesting to tune in, a rivalry game.
Yeah, for sure. Another rivalry that's going to be happening this weekend is going to be Crosby against Ovechkin. When Pittsburgh faces Washington, the games will take place in Pittsburgh. It's actually two games. Both Saturday and Tuesday are in Pittsburgh. So you'll get to see Crosby against Ovechkin twice, both Sunday and Tuesday. So definitely that's always a game to tune into, as those two teams, they're rivals. Crosby and Ovechkin have been tied to each other since they were rookies. They've always been compared to each other in terms of who's the better player, and it's always exciting to watch when these two players go head to head.
This is like a classic matchup, and we get to see it twice.
Yeah, I know, twice in 1 week. That's a first.
And speaking of exciting matchups, we have NHL Stanley Cup Part 2. So what do you think of that?
Yeah, originally the first Stanley Cup final rematch was supposed to happen on Sunday, but because of the Dallas COVID situation, that game got postponed. But Dallas is going to be playing the Lightning in Tampa Bay on Tuesday as well. So the Sunday game being postponed, you will get to see those two teams face on Tuesday. That's pending any postponement from that game as well. Hopefully that game doesn't get postponed, because that'd be an amazing game to watch. These two teams face again. The Stanley Cup final was a great one to watch this year, and hopefully we'll get to see some great action from the rematch.
Sounds good. And that about recaps the Fantasy Fanatics Podcast hockey segment for this week. There's going to be a lot of exciting games to watch.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of exciting games to watch, both on opening night and later in the week. I wanted to mention that the hockey pool, by the time this episode is up, will be closed. So we'll be removing the link from the description. Those that have entered the hockey pool, um, let's hope for a great season, and we'll see who comes out on top. All right, welcome to the Fantasy Fanatics injury report. Before we get started, I just want to make a correction. We are removing the joining link for the hockey pool from the description, but we'll be replacing it with a link to the standings for the hockey pool. So you can check out where each team is in the standings and who's leading the hockey pool at any given time. We'll hop into the injury report now. I'm joined once again by Sheridan College AT student Victoria Kumar. Welcome.
Hi.
Yeah, let's hop into the NFL injuries. It's the divisional playoffs this weekend, and let's talk about some injuries. We'll start with Sammy Watkins.
Yeah, so Sammy Watkins was rested in week 17 against the Chargers, and then due to that calf injury that he's been having, he's now had 2 weeks of rest, as obviously the Chiefs had a bye week last week. What was very interesting, however, is when the media came to watch the portion of Wednesday's practice, they didn't see him. He wasn't present at all. He wasn't even present for the walkthrough. So that's obviously not good, because maybe he won't play. We're just going to have to, of course, watch him over the next few days, see if any reports come out if he's practicing. And then if he practices, then he will play.
All right. What about Clyde Edwards-Helaire?
Yeah, so Clyde Edwards-Helaire on Wednesday, he returned to practice in a limited capacity with he's been struggling with both a hip and ankle injury. This looks good and indicates that he'll probably play this weekend, as like I said, it's the second round of the playoffs. So teams are going to be putting in their best players.
What about Bills receivers Stephon Diggs and Cole Beasley?
Yeah, so starting with Stephon Diggs, I reported last week that he was labeled with an oblique injury, and we didn't really expect him to play. But then he played, and he was still part of that injured reserve. This is not concerning to me now at all, since now he's practicing again. He's still not practicing in full capacity, but he's still practicing. He played last week. He's going to play again this week. He's not much of a concern for anyone. Then Cole Beasley. So Cole Beasley was questionable due to an ankle injury. And in practices all throughout last week, they actually replaced him with a backup receiver, which made us believe, okay, it looks like he's not going to play. He's just kind of present for the practice. But then he ended up playing, much to everybody's surprise. So again, this week, like Stephon Diggs, he was playing, having a limited practice. I don't think that means anything. He's going to play when he played last week.
Yeah, I saw the injury to Zach Moss on the weekend. Could you explain whether he's going to play or not and what's going on with that injury?
Yeah, so he went down against the Colts with what looked to be what they said in the reports, a left ankle injury. I watched the footage, I got to see everything, and I was watching it, and it could be one of three things. So they reported it as an ankle injury. So it first of all looked like he went down with what we call an eversion ankle sprain. So that's where most ankle sprains are inversion. That's kind of where you roll your foot inwards, and that's what we commonly see. But this one, it looked like he was kind of rolling it outwards. So that's where you injure kind of the inside ligaments called your deltoid ligaments on the inside of your foot. So that's one thing that it could have been. It also could be a high ankle sprain because the way that he came down, when you come in that inversion way, you also split the tibia and fibula bones. And in between that is the interosseous membrane, which is what a high ankle sprain is when you injure that interosseous membrane. So the way that he came down with that eversion ankle sprain could be also a high ankle sprain. And if it is, definitely going to be putting him out. And another thing, when I looked at the footage, it looked like it might have been also some kind of knee MCL injury, because when he came down, the Colts player trapped his lower leg underneath his body, kind of came down on his lower leg, and his entire upper body kind of pivoted around his knee, and he kind of went in the direction outside of his knee. So the inside of his knee got stretched out. So he could have also partially tore his MCL. It looks like a pretty severe injury if it's any one of the three. So I don't know if we're going to see him out for the rest of the playoffs. I think he's going to be ruled out and not play at all, but he should be good for next season, as these three injuries will be easily rehabable by next season.
What about Ronald Jones? I know he was active last week, but he didn't play any snaps. So what's going on with him?
So Ronald Jones is dealing with some kind of quad inflammation. So this could be due to either a quad contusion or a quad strain. So quad contusion being a direct hit he got to his quad, or a strain being that he pulled it. And so basically quad inflammation, as most people know, it's like just swelling, major swelling that he's going through, and probably weakness. He was not present in Wednesday's practice at all. This is obviously not a good sign, as he didn't actually take any snaps last week, even though he was considered active. So what I would say with that is, even if he's considered active, don't count on him playing, because he obviously didn't play last week, but he probably will be on the bench again.
What about Green Bay's receiver Allen Lazard?
Yeah, so Allen Lazard has suffered 2 injuries this season. So first he had like a core muscle injury when he got surgery for. So that could have either been, they didn't really go into detail, but he could have had like maybe a 2nd-degree strain where he had a lot of tearing and they had to repair it. Or it could have been something like a sports hernia, so where you get a tear at the attachment of the muscle on the pubic bone. Either way, he came back from that core muscle injury in December, and he got his surgery in October. So he only had 2 months of recovery. And that's not a lot of time for a core muscle recovery. Normally you're seeing more 4 months recovery to get a full and complete recovery. And so he was probably not 100% on that. And then he got a wrist injury. He did play last week. That's a good sign. He's probably going to play again this week, but let's just hope, obviously, for his health, that he continues to rehab it over the summer.
Yeah, I mean, week 17, I believe, because they were on a bye last week.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what about Jared Goff with his thumb issue?
Okay, so Jared Goff, they actually labeled him as questionable because, obviously he's going through that thumb injury. He has a thumb fracture. He did play last week. And then they were considering maybe this week we should put in the backup And then during practice, the backup got a like kind of a neck injury. I think he pulled one of his neck muscles. So
I
after
think
that
it might have been in the
happened,
game. Something happened
or
in the
something,
game.
yeah, I don't remember what exactly happened. Maybe
Yeah.
it was practice, maybe it was the game. I can't remember.
I think he
But
took a hit in the game.
yeah, well, what I'm
I
saying is,
believe it was Jamal Adams. He came in on the pass rush and then he hit the quarterback. There was like a stretcher or something. I can't remember what happened, but
yeah. So the thing with him is obviously even if they were taking a look at them, well, they both have injuries. One of them's got to play. A guy who's only made about, I think he only made about 2 starts versus a guy who's played for them all season and got them into the playoffs as Jared Goff has, you're obviously going to play Jared Goff over a
and it's
backup
against Green
QB.
Bay, yeah.
Yeah, so Jared Goff's going to play like 100%. I don't even doubt it. Maybe they're going to have a third string QB come in and, help him out a little bit, but he's going to play.
Yeah. What about Daryl Henderson?
So Daryl Henderson, as I said last week, there's not much of an update that's different. I just wanted to mention that he was just questionable last week, and now he's not questionable anymore. He's completely ruled out. He will be out for the rest of the playoffs. That's just all I wanted to say regarding him.
And then one last NFL injury is Cooper Kupp.
Yeah. So Cooper Kupp last week, he was on that COVID list.
Oh, it's
and
COVID. Okay.
Yeah. And then he seems he's off it, but now he's struggling with a bursitis knee injury. So what
Okay.
bursitis really is if it's on the knee, it's most likely his prepatellar bursa, which is, so I'm first going to explain what a bursa is. So bursas are present in the body to kind of help with, stopping that friction between a tendon going over a bone. So your quad tendon actually passes over your kneecap. And so a bursa is there to help prevent friction from happening and swelling. So, but what happens is sometimes the bursas themselves get inflamed, and that's what's going on in his case. So he probably has a really huge knee. It's probably one knee, the knee with the bursa that's inflamed is much bigger than the other one. And they can get inflamed by repetitive, constant motion on it. Could be from a direct hit as well, right to his kneecap. He could have gotten an inflammation. Bursitis is actually really painful. So if he has a flare up right before the game, he's not going to play. If he doesn't have a flare up, then he will. That's kind of how it works. It kind of comes and goes.
Yeah.
So we may see him this week, but we may not. We
Yeah,
really
well, I
don't know
think
until game time. Most
Yeah, I
likely.
think the Rams do have enough depth at receiver with guys like Josh Reynolds, Van
Yeah.
Jefferson, and others to sort of cover.
Mhm.
Let's go transition over to the NBA. We'll
Yeah.
start with an update on Darius Garland.
Yeah, so he's going through a shoulder sprain injury. And like I mentioned last week, he will be out at least a week or so. So I wasn't surprised at all that he has not played since then. He's not yet put on that injured reserve as he's not deemed a long-term injury. And I mentioned that last week that it's probably not going to be a long-term injury. He's probably going to be out a couple weeks. So like I predicted last week, he's going to probably be either back this weekend or early next week. That's something I said.
One injury that came out just after we posted our injury report is that Markelly Fultz, what did he tear? Was it his ACL?
Yeah, so Markelly Fultz tore his left ACL last week in a game against the Cavaliers. This was actually a non-contact injury as it occurred simply due to a foot plant and a quick change in direction. I actually watched the footage on it. So what he did is he was coming into the zone and he was going in for a layup, I think, and he did the first foot plant of the layup on his left foot. And as he began to change in direction on that planted foot, his femur kind of rotated, you know how your knee does when you rotate around your knee, and his femur rotated internally and back, and then he kind of had a buckle and then he fell. So because of that, it was just an ACL tear right off there. He just made the quick turn and then boom, it snapped and he fell. So
Was it a full tear?
I don't know if they even said if it was a full tear, but
he'll be
either
out
way,
for
it's
the
enough.
season.
It's enough that he's going to need surgery. So it's
yeah,
either a
his season's
second
done.
degree. So second degree tear is enough fibers that you need it to get repaired, and then a full tear would be it's fully gone.
But his season's done.
Yeah, his season's definitely done. He's going to need surgery on it.
Okay. What about Joe Ingles?
Yeah, so Joe Ingles, he's been in and out with an Achilles soreness since last week. He played on Sunday and then he sat out on Tuesday's game. He's been more day-to-day than anything. He may play Friday because he hasn't played for the last 3 games. And then if not, then we're going to probably see him Sunday against the Nuggets. He's the kind of person that's going to might be back and forth for a few games until he's better. So he'll have 1 game on, 1 game off, 1 game on, 1 game off. So we're going to have to see him, but then in a couple weeks, he'll probably be fine and back to normal.
What about Wesley Matthews?
Yeah, so he also has some kind of Achilles injury, but it looks like it's more of a strain. After an MRI report came back, it just reported, I think, just swelling. Like they didn't report anything new. This is good news, as he has actually already previously pulled his Achilles back in 2015. He had to get it repaired. And so obviously didn't want to have to go through that long recovery again. He's taken a couple games off, and they look to play him on Thursday or on Friday. No, sorry, they're taking a look at him on Thursday, but then they hope to play him Friday, I think is their next game, or Monday if not. And like Joe Ingles with Wesley Matthews, it's not going to be a long recovery, just a few days to allow the swelling to reduce and allow that tissue healing to occur.
In getting back to the Cleveland Cavaliers, they've had a lot of injuries. What about guys like Andre Drummond and Colin Sexton?
Yeah, so Andre Drummond is currently suffering with a bruised Achilles. We seem to have quite a few Achilles this week. He did not play on Tuesday. Their next game is not until Friday. Since nothing new has been released, we could actually assume that he's working towards playing Friday. So we're just going to have to watch the reports on his injury, as it didn't really seem like something super severe. Moving on to Colin Sexton, he's been out since last week with ankle soreness. On Tuesday, he underwent an MRI that showed nothing new, which is good news that it didn't show anything new than what they already thought. So it seems it's just a small ankle sprain. He didn't play Tuesday against the Jazz, but the team expects him back this weekend or again early next week.
Also, what's going on with Lonzo Ball?
Yeah, so Lonzo Ball has been diagnosed with bilateral jumper's knee, which is basically knee tendonitis. And so, like I mentioned, anything that ends with itis, tendonitis, all that's all inflammation that's going on. So this is where the patellar tendon, that's the one that passes over the kneecap, it got inflamed. Jumper's knee is very tricky because, like I mentioned, with inflammation, you can have flare-ups, right? So you can go one day where you're good and one day where you're not. That's kind of what I mentioned with bursitis, same thing. But he's definitely doing treatment right now. So some things, if you don't have a lot of flare-ups, you can do treatment while playing. I think he will take a few weeks rest though and then come back. So kind of what causes tendonitis is obviously it could be from, a pull or that kind of thing where you kind of stress your tendon. But the most common cause of it is what we call a decrease or a less eccentric strength. So that's the strength that it takes to stop. So let's say you're running and you're going in and you make a quick stop, and that's what eccentric strength is. It requires that to stop you. So oftentimes when players have tendonitis, they need to build up that strength. So he's definitely working with the trainers to build that up. And if the tendonitis doesn't go down after a couple months, they're probably going to then consider something like surgery. Most of the time, though, you don't really need surgery, especially at a young age. So, again, he's somebody we're going to have to see more information on. We're going to have to watch what comes out, but I expect he's going to be out for a couple weeks at first, and then they'll give another report regarding how he's progressing, and he might be even able to play through some of the tendonitis.
What about the Pelicans' other guard, Eric Bledsoe?
Yeah, so he has an eye irritation. So he was ruled out of Wednesday's game over it. We don't exactly know what's wrong with his eye. It could be a number of things. He could obviously have something as bad as an eye infection, which is, he'll be out for probably 2-3 weeks if that's what's happening. It could be like a seasonal irritation. Maybe he's got allergies to certain things during, this time. Or it could be, most likely what I think is a scratched cornea. So the cornea is that outer layer of your eye, and he scratched it, or someone scratched it during a game. Normally you're only out for a day or two with that, or maybe max 3 days. So I think we should see him back by next game if that's what it is.
The Washington Wizards have also been dealing with a lot of injuries. I know Thomas Bryant got injured, Russell Westbrook got injured. What's going on with them?
Yeah, so Thomas Bryant initially went down with an inversion ankle sprain, but then after the MRI came out, they discovered he had it partially torn ACL. And when you actually rewatch the footage, I got to watch it, you see him come down with that inversion ankle sprain. You obviously clearly see that. But then another thing you see is his knee kind of goes into a hyperextension where his femur kind of moves back. So that's the top bone moves back on the bottom bone. And that's where you can get an ACL tear. So most likely when he came down on that inversion ankles, he kind of came down and he landed with that inverted angle, but also his knee kind of buckled. You got to see in the footage. So he probably got both an ACL tear and an inversion ankle sprain with that. So he's going to be out for the rest of the season. He's going to be doing some surgery and that kind of thing. And then
Westbrook. Yeah,
Westbrook, yeah. So Westbrook was originally slated to only miss 1 week with a quad injury, but now it looks like he's going to be out 3 to 4 weeks. This is most likely then going to be a second-degree quad strain, where maybe originally they thought it was a first strain. So either he got an MRI that showed that he got a second degree, or maybe he noticed after a few days that he was very weak. Maybe a lot of bruising and swelling and pain showed up, indicating a second-degree strain.
What about Evan Fournier?
Yeah, so Evan Fournier is currently out with back spasms, and he's been out for the last 6 days. Back spasms can be a number of different things. So it can obviously be something as bad as maybe a disc irritation or like a ruptured spinal disc. Or it could be something as simple as maybe he's got bad posture and now it's affecting him and causing spasming. Or it could be he pulled a back muscle, which is most likely what it is. So he either pulled one of his lat muscles or his trap muscles, maybe erector spinae. So he's probably working with the trainers on strengthening these. We're going to have to watch him over the next few days. It depends on the degree of strain, if it is a back muscle. And hopefully we'll see him in the next week or so.
Just go over. There's about 2 or 3 more injuries. Just quickly cover them in the NBA.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with start off with Bogdanovic. So he went down against the Hornets with an avulsion fracture of his right knee. He's going to be out for a minimum of 4 to 6 weeks with this, because an avulsion fracture is what it sounds like, a fracture, but what it is it's kind of a break off of the bone. So it's where a tendon or ligament attaches to the bone and you kind of get a break off of it. This commonly happens in the foot, but this one happened in the knee. So most likely it's what we call a Segond fracture. So that's where the lateral part of your knee, the outside of your knee, there's a part where the capsule attaches. The capsule ligaments, probably he stressed his knee and the ligament pulled on it and it broke off a piece of the outer part of his bone. And often this is highly associated with ACL injury. So he's really got to rehab this so that he can prevent an ACL injury from happening, which will put him out for even longer. So put him on your IR for now. He's going to be out for the next 4 to 6 weeks at least. Then moving on to Jeremy Lamb. Jeremy Lamb had a left knee torn ACL. He's been recovering from since last year. So that's when it happened. I think it was last summer. He's now back to full practices with the team. So he should be playing hopefully by next week. He just needs to be cleared by the docs in order to play.
All right. Moving on to the NHL injuries. Actually, before we move on to the NHL injuries, I did want to ask you, there's some COVID situations going on in the NBA. Could you just list the teams and then just maybe list the date that they'll be coming back?
So yeah, the thing with COVID in the NBA that's been really concerning, I'm just going to talk about quickly first before we go through the teams, is they require a long time of quarantine. So if you get it, you have to quarantine for 10 days minimum. If you're in close contact, that's 7 days minimum. So they have these really long timelines. And so that's what's really affecting a lot of teams and getting a lot of postponed games. So Dallas Mavericks have about 4 confirmed cases. We don't really know which ones are actually positive, but they did have to postpone Monday's game, but they didn't have to postpone Wednesdays. So it looks like they're moving forward from out of that COVID situation. They had players such as Josh Richardson out, which is a huge part of their team. Moving on to Boston Celtics, they currently have more than 9 players inactive. They actually came short on Tuesday and Wednesday. Those games had to been postponed because they didn't have enough players in their lineup. And then actually with them, Jason Tatum and Robert Williams were the 2 players that came out positive, causing players like Tristan Thompson, Jaylen Brown to go into quarantine with them. They're scheduled to play the Magic on Friday. We're going to have to see if that gets canceled, if we can get some recoveries in the next few days. But for now, it looks like it's slated to go. Moving on to Miami Heat, they have about 8 players who are out due to these, again, health and safety protocols or COVID-19. These are like Jimmy Butler and Avery Bradley and so on. And the breakout actually started with Avery Bradley. He got COVID-19. They did play the 76ers on Tuesday. So again, that's a good sign that they have enough players back to begin their games. Yeah, so you need that minimum amount of players or else they're going to cancel the game. The 76ers themselves had a little bit of a breakout. They have 5 players out due to COVID, such as Seth Curry, who got it, and Tobias Harris. And so they're just kind of quarantining right now, but they have enough players to continue with their games. Yeah, I'm just going to move on to Eric Pascal from the Warriors. He had a false positive, so he's good. He's back.
Okay. Right.
Michael Porter Jr., he'd been out for a while through contact tracing, and then he actually got COVID, maybe from the contact. So he's out for now, and we're just going to have to see if he tests negative in the next week or so. Lauri Markkanen, he's now been cleared of COVID, and he was practicing with the team, so we're going to see him back this Friday.
Okay, with the NHL, I believe most of the injuries as of right now are day to day because teams are pretty much getting ready to start the season. So we'll just move straight through to the COVID news. Just talk about maybe a couple players that have gotten COVID, or maybe which teams are dealing with their COVID situations.
Yeah, so I'm just going to mention Mika Zibanejad first. So he was out last week with an undisclosed injury. That undisclosed injury turned out to be COVID-19. He's obviously been cleared because he started practicing again. He may not play Thursday, though, because he was out pretty much the entire training camp with this, what they had called undisclosed injury, and now we found out it was COVID-19. But do keep in mind, if he does play Thursday, we're going to see limited minutes out of him because COVID-19 causes players to be breathless. So even if they're fully recovered from it, sometimes they're still don't have their cardio fully up.
Okay, that makes sense.
So if he plays, if anything, he's gonna spend more time on the bench, may not get you the most points. But hopefully by the weekend he'll be fully back and good with his cardio. And then I'm just gonna mention two teams that kind of had a COVID outbreak, kind of like what happened in the NBA. So the Dallas Stars had a huge COVID outbreak. The NHL, after testing all the players, had about 27 players that came out positive, and 17 of them were from Dallas Stars. So they had quite a few COVID injuries. Initially, it was 6 players and 2 staff that's tested positive, and then they had about 17 players that came forward after that with that. So then, obviously some of them turned out to be false positives as they are now back to practicing. This all happened this past Friday. So some of them were false positives because, like I said, they're back. But then they noticed that some of the players that were missing practice were Esa Lindell, Jamie Olesiak, and so on. So obviously these were players that were positive, or because most of the team has already been cleared and has been through that contact isolation. Yeah. And then moving on to Vancouver. So Vancouver just only had a couple cases, just JT Miller and Jordy Ben. So it was Jordy Ben that had a positive, and JT Miller was a close contact of his because JT Miller is currently living with him. They live in the same house.
They're like roommates or something.
Yeah, exactly. So the positive may have been false. We don't actually know, but he still had to go into quarantine, and they're going to retest him and see. But even so, they put JT Miller in quarantine with him. Regardless, we're not going to see these guys until at least Wednesday of next week. Reason being, the Vancouver Canucks are on the road until next Wednesday when they play the Habs. So the road trip, the team has already left, and since they're in quarantine, even if they get cleared and they were like, oh, it's a false positive, they're not going to play.
Not going to join the team.
They're not going to come on the road trip. They're just going to stay at home, and then they'll play Wednesday. Either way, they're not going to play all weekend. Don't even put them in your lineup.
All right, that about wraps up the injury report, I think. Victoria, thank you for your time.
No problem.
And just once again, make sure that you check out this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Take a look in the description below. We have our Facebook. Follow us at Fantasy Fanatics Podcast, on Instagram at Podcast Fantasy Fanatics. And we'll also have the link to view the standings for the hockey pool that we're running. And just once again, thank you for listening to the Fantasy Fanatics Podcast. We'll catch you again on our next episode.
Bye.